Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 341. Bam, creak. Returning to her temple, Hera slammed her fist on the table. It was a precious piece of furniture made from wood that had grown for thousands of years, brought from the city of the elves. Although it was an item she usually cherished, such things were not in Hera's eyes as she was angry. Come out, I said. In the empty room, Robin appeared before her, who was shouting in resentment. Since when had he been watching? The foolish Chaos politely clasped his hands together and greeted her. Did you call? What happened? Explain it to me, quickly. I didn't know Pandora would be there. Why couldn't you think? Why? Crash. Furniture decorated throughout the room was broken by the scream that sounded like a scream. The windows shattered and glass cups and plates poured out in sharp pieces. Even after a while of hysteria, the foolish Chaos watched her calmly. As if to say that it was up to her to break or burn it since it was her house anyway. Ha, ha, she was more out of breath because she had been angry too much than because she had lost her strength. Hera breathed out the anger she had built up inside for a while and glared at the foolish Chaos. What are we going to do now? Still, it's not like there were no gains. What, gains? Yes, thanks to that, I was able to confirm that he was involved in this. If he is, are you talking about Kim Yu-won? Yes. Crash. The only remaining window was broken. It was the window behind the foolish Chaos. Are you talking about gains like that now? Her eyes changed fiercely. Unlike the foolish Chaos, she didn't think Yu-won's existence was that great. Of course, their biggest enemy was still Hercules. No matter how big a fire it was all the same in front of the sun. Since Hades had been dealt with, the only remaining target was Hercules. Whether you deal with Hercules or find a way to break through that divinity, you have to do it. Wasn't that our promise? Even though I dealt with Hades, it was you who couldn't enter the castle. What, Pandora, were you that scared of her? The foolish Chaos took a big step forward. Hera, whose eyes had been blinded by anger until just now, was startled. Hera took a step back from the rebuke that she had prepared the table. But what were you doing? No, to be exact, it was because the foolish Chaos in front of her suddenly seemed huge. Crunch. The foolish Chaos took a step forward. Only then did Hera realize that she was stepping back. The distance that seemed to be getting closer quickly enough to see the face in the robe that she had never seen before. Grin. The corners of her mouth went up. You did well. What, you fought? It would have been worse. You made the right choice. You will never, ever defeat Pandora. As if those words could reach her ears. Her pride was hurt, but Hera just bit her lip and couldn't provoke the foolish Chaos any further. Of course, he had already fulfilled his role, and more, just by killing Hades. There are still many ways. Even if Pandora is holding out, there are many ways to take over the castle. Ways? What ways? There are so many that I can't count them all. There were many cards in his hand. He didn't need to think hard. The long history of Olympus. There were many enemies made in the process, and it was so easy for the foolish Chaos to incite them and make them rise up. And among them, Olympus has many enemies. The foolish Chaos was contemplating which card to use. The 10th task took longer than expected. Heracles was confident in his strength more than anyone else, but he didn't have any skills other than strength. Furthermore, the 10th task was not simply about capturing something, but a test to safely bring back the cattle. Heracles was sweating as he watched the disobedient cattle. He couldn't just kill them and bring back their bodies, so he had no choice but to coax them with words. But then, do you only have to bring them alive? Eurytion twisted his thoughts. Heracles prepared a rope. A rope made by weaving his magical power, that could never be cut. He tied the cattle together with the rope, and Heracles forcibly dragged the herd of red cattle. There's nothing easy. Returning to the sun chariot, Heracles was drenched in sweat. Even Heracles, who had plenty of strength left, couldn't help but get tired after forcibly dragging tens of thousands of cattle. Furthermore, it was no ordinary task to make such a long rope. But fortunately, thanks to Eurytion's words, the 10th task was not as difficult as he thought. You've worked hard. Eurytion greeted Heracles, who had returned to the sun chariot. It had been 3 days since Hera had invaded, aiming for the castle. The tasks were going smoothly. Is it the 11th now? Eurytion nodded at Heracles, murmur. Fortunately, the 11th task took place on the same floor as the 10th task. However, unlike other tasks, it was different in that the location was not specified. The problem is finding the Garden of Hesperides with the apple tree. I know the location. It was unexpected that Heracles knew the location of the garden with the golden apple tree. Even Eurytion only knew about the place in the abstract. I heard it from Prometheus before starting the task. Go to the end of the world. The end of the world. If it was the end of the world, there was a place that all floors had in common. Is it the wall? Probably. The scope was much narrower than searching the entire world. Besides, if you ride the sun chariot, you will probably find it soon. It's better prepared than I thought. Prometheus was the brother of Atlas, the giant of the Hesperides, who had the golden apples. Perhaps he is the ranker who knows the location of the Garden of the Hesperides best in this tower. It was quite wise to visit him before starting the task. It seemed that there was no need to go out and find the garden. Yuan watched Heracles, who was starting to move the sun chariot with his arms folded. It's hard to help from behind. Yuan's occasional advice was mostly the methods Heracles had solved before. With his poor head, he spent a long time finding the answer, but Yuan didn't have to. It was a task that Heracles had already solved, so it was enough to just tell him the method. Thanks to this, a lot of time could be saved. And that was the problem. The fact that the task is going so smoothly, probably. So far, it was as Heracles had heard. All the tasks were exactly the same. If the task was given with Heracles in mind, the test could not have gone so smoothly. Not dispersion, but concentration. It means that the mischief was focused on one side. The sun chariot began to move. It wasn't about moving multiple floors, it was just about going to the end of the world. It took an hour to move. And during that time, Heracles focused on recovering his body as much as possible. Gulp. He moistened his mouth with an expensive potion and filled his stomach. Heracles, who had rested like that, got up from his seat and looked out of the carriage. An unbreakable black wall. Beyond that wall, the world was completely cut off from the outside. And around it, somewhere near here, a golden forest was visible. What's so noticeable? Thud. It was then that Yuan approached. What were you doing and where? During the move, Heracles had forgotten that Yuan was riding with him. I'm here, advertising or something. Do you see it that way too? It's not that I see it that way, it's like that. Ha, a deep sigh. It was obvious what he was thinking. Yuan glanced at Heracles and asked. Are you not going to avoid it even if it's a trap? If the golden apples are there. I thought so. He was so relieved that he answered too easily. As if he had expected it, Yuan put one hand on his forehead. This kind of ignorant personality is no different from Sun Ogong. Perhaps the foolish chaos knew this kind of Heracles' personality. Rather, since it openly revealed itself as a trap, Heracles intended to confront it head-on. He had the attitude to forcefully break through whatever was prepared. Dodging around and using his head didn't suit Heracles. All right, then let's go. He was curious. What did they prepare to catch Heracles? It probably wouldn't be easy. Even without that, the 11th labor was known to be the most difficult out of all the labors. And yet they even set a trap for such a task. This was like a test given by the foolish chaos. Let me pass. Thud. Yuan, who got off the sun's chariot, followed Heracles into the forest that was shining with a golden light. But it won't be easy for you either. Roar. The golden light instantly engulfed Yuan and Heracles. Their vision disappeared for a moment. You have entered the hidden dungeon, ruined garden of the Hesperides. A message with a different name than the one Yuan knew appeared. As expected, he thought that they would have done something. And that something was reflected in the system. Ruined. Just like the word said, a completely different scenery unfolded before their eyes once the golden light disappeared. The first thing he saw was Heracles' back, who had entered first. He was standing there blankly as if he had lost his words and purpose. He looked as if he was shocked by something. Swish. Yuan took a step to the side and saw the scenery in front of Heracles, who was blocking his view. And naturally, Yuan showed the same reaction as Heracles. What is that? A grotesquely twisted tree. The land around the tree was dead and black. And there was the corpse of a monster leaning on the dead tree. The golden apple tree was guarded by a dragon named Ladon. Heracles, who was heavily drunk, used to tell the heroic story of that time. It wasn't like him to brag about a fight. It seemed like it must have been a memorable fight. He was a fearsome guy. My fight with him lasted for 5 days. He must have been strong. To say that much, strong, it wasn't just something you could say like that. Yuan looked at the withered dragon's corpse that had collapsed in front of him. He had 100 heads, and each of his mouths breathed out a different attribute breath. His snake-like heads had even stronger teeth than the Hydra. 100 heads, sharp snake-like heads. To put it simply, he was no match for the Yamata no Orochi or the Hydra. It was certain, the corpse of the monster that had collapsed there. That guy was Ladon. Chapter 342. Ladon. A monster with 100 heads and a dragon, the leader of the dragons. Cursed by Uranus, he was relegated to a life of guarding the golden apple, but he had the power to overwhelm even Hercules. However, apparently, Radon, who should have been the final boss of the 12 tasks, was dead. As that Radon, as if organizing his thoughts, Hercules opened his mouth after a long time. He too had heard of the dragon guarding the golden apple tree. No, the story of Radon was a legend so famous that everyone in Olympus knew it. Naturally, Hercules had also been preparing for a fight with Radon. It seems so. It looks like someone has already been here. Hidden dungeons are literally hidden, which is why they are called hidden. Moreover, it was not an ordinary forest, but a dungeon where the Hesperides guarded the golden apple tree with Radon. But the golden apple was gone. Is this the end? It's not over. As soon as Yuan finished speaking. Thud, the ground of the garden shook, and there was a sign of life beyond the invisible bushes. There's no way it will end with just interfering with the task. There's something more. The guy who made this place. The guy who stole the golden apple and killed Radon. He's probably not an ordinary guy. He wasn't in sight right now, but Hercules could vaguely sense the guy's identity. And so did Yuan. Gigantification, detects an enemy. A forgotten giant bares his teeth at gigantification. There was no need to use the eye of the heavenly demon to see him. With this message alone, Yuan could tell who was behind the Hesperides, Garden and Radon. That guy, I knew he was around here. But I didn't know I'd meet him like this. If possible, I wanted to bring that guy to my side. Thud, heavy footsteps. Yuan turned his head at the sound of footsteps filled with magic power. The owner of this earth tremor was Hercules. I guess I don't have to go looking for him. Wah-ah, magic power erupted from Hercules' body. Flaunting the power of gigantification, Hercules provoked the giant hiding in the bushes. It's obvious who he's aiming for. Oh, this is a bit. Pggg, Yuan prepared his spear right away. Black lightning poured out of the ring and wrapped around his hand. The lightning devoured enormous magic power and transformed into the shape of a spear. Thud, thud, thud. The footsteps got closer, and so, soon. Whoosh, the giant, who quickly revealed himself, knocking down the lush trees. Yuan threw his spear at the giant without hesitation. Flash, boom, the lightning bolt, which had devoured enormous magic power, struck the giant's body. It was a force that would have pierced the body of an ordinary giant and annihilated it without a trace. However, Giik, the giant who emerged from the bushes was only pushed back a little. Hercules stroked his chin at the sight of the giant who blocked the spear by crossing his arms. Hercules knew for sure how powerful the lightning was because he had been hit by it several times. Indeed, he was an unusual guy from the beginning. Yuan and Hercules looked at the giant who revealed his face by unfolding his crossed arms. A size of about 4 meters, not that big for a giant. Dark brown hair and empty eyes with no focus. And golden fruit juice on his lips. A giant holding up the sky. Now that I see it with my own eyes, I know for sure. Atlas, his punishment began long before Gigantomachi began. Before the battle between the giants and Olympus began. When Atlas, who had half human and half giant blood, sided with the giants in the end, Zeus imprisoned him around the garden and made him receive one punishment for the rest of his life. He had to carry a giant mountain that weighed hundreds of millions of tons, and if he ever dropped it, his fellow tribesmen would be crushed to death by the mountain. Of course, Atlas himself, who was carrying the mountain, would also die. Growl. Atlas bared his teeth and cried. He looked half mad. He seemed to be very angry after being struck by lightning. Thud. As he took a step forward, Hercules also began to walk toward him. For the first time since the task began, Wu Yun stopped Hercules' movement. Do you know, this isn't a normal task. Hercules stopped for a moment. You're not going to do it alone, are you? Radon was dead. For some reason, a giant who shouldn't be here was waiting for them, and the whereabouts of the golden apple were difficult to find right away. The task that had been passed down as a legend on Olympus had already been twisted. This was a trap to catch Hercules. That guy is my kind. Thud, 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 thud. Atlas walked briskly. So that bastard is my opponent. Hercules was the greatest strongman in this tower. However, Atlas, who was walking towards him, was no pushover either. Bang! Hercules and Atlas. The two kicked off the ground at the same time and rushed towards each other. Roar! The axis shook at the collision of the two giants. A clash of pure strength, not magic. The force from the collision turned the earth upside down and created a gust of wind. Creak, roar, crash. Hercules, club struck Atlas in the abdomen, and Atlas, foot kicked Hercules. The two swung their fists and clubs at each other as if they didn't know how to defend themselves. It was literally a dogfight. A physical ability that matches Hercules, who has the club of Yggdrasil. Furthermore, he is overcoming the natural enemy of gigantism. In terms of pure physical ability alone, there were few in this tower who could match Hercules. Perhaps only a few in the top 5 rankings. Below that, there would be no one to compare to, let alone an opponent. Even the great Odin admitted that he was lacking compared to Hercules in terms of physical ability alone. How the hell did that guy get here? Before the task began, I heard from Prometheus. He told me to go to the end of the world. Prometheus. The moment that name came to mind, Wu Yun thought of his relationship with Atlas. A half-human, half-giant. Brothers. Atlas, brother, Prometheus, told Hercules the location of the garden with the golden apple tree. Perhaps that's where things started to go wrong. The problem was, how he got here. It's not like the other giants are helping him. As he thought about it, one picture came to Wu Yun's mind. The second Gigantomachy, Atlas, fellow tribesman who would save him from the punishment given by Zeus. It wasn't over, he thought too carelessly. The one who caused Gigantomachy was Zeus. However, Hercules was the one who led the charge in that war. He thought that if Zeus was taken down and Olympus stopped the war, everything would be over. It was a complacent thought. Even if we stop here, they won't stop. If one side stopped, the collision would only be delayed, and eventually, it would happen. Zeus was taken down, but the wrath of the giants did not stop. Even within the giants, there may have been a conflict of opinions, like Hera and Hades, between those who wanted to stop the war and those who thought they should see it through to the end. This is crazy. Recognizing the presence of Atlas, Yu-1 realized which way the tide of this battle would flow. Giants. And the rekindling of Gigantomachy, which had paused for a while. That was the ultimate picture that the foolish chaos wanted to draw by moving Hera. When his thoughts had reached that point. Boom. Screech. Heracles, who had been hit by Atlas, flew in front of Yu-1 and hurriedly grabbed the ground with his hands to regain his balance. It seemed like he had been pushed back. Heracles regained his posture and tried to run toward Atlas. Heracles. At Yu-1's call, Heracles turned his head. Since they were in the middle of a fight, he couldn't say much. We need to fight together. Not yet, it's Gigantomachy. Heracles, eyes widened. Gigantomachy, that was a word that remained a sore spot for Heracles. This isn't a problem that will end in Olympus' civil war. If we're not careful. Crack, Heracles was crushed under Atlas's foot. The Gigantomachy that had stopped will start again. Crack, crack, Heracles, forearms swelled up. While supporting Atlas's enormous foot with both hands, Heracles continued the conversation. Is that true? Yes. Damn it. Growl. His teeth grinded, and his gaze changed. Hera, that bastard. Crack, crack. Strength was added to his arms supporting the foot. The magic power spreading throughout Heracles' body gave off an explosive aura. Swish. He grabbed Atlas's leg with both hands and lifted it up. Atlas lost his balance. Holding onto the skin on the sole of Atlas's foot with the strength of his grip, Heracles threw Atlas with all his might. Whoosh. Crack, crackle, boom. Atlas's massive body, which had been thrown, turned the garden of the Hesperides upside down. And Yu-1 couldn't help but stick his tongue out for a moment at the sight of Heracles. He might not have been able to last 30 minutes. What if Heracles had approached the fight with him with this kind of momentum from the beginning? 30 minutes. He wondered if he would have been able to withstand it. He suddenly lost confidence. Gigantification, a power that was the natural enemy of all giants. Heracles no longer had the time to be ashamed of that power. And that meant, swish, that he wouldn't be picky about what he did anymore. Yu-1 grabbed a spear from his inventory. Near, the strongest attack that Yuan possessed. Right now, this was the only attack that could deal effective damage to Atlas. Is there a way to stop him? There must be, right? I know now. You're saying there is, for now. It wasn't a very reliable answer. But Heracles was able to feel relieved. Even though he had said for now, there was a way regardless. And there had never been anything that Yuan hadn't been able to do until now. So for now, crunch, let's take care of that guy. Yuan's and Heracles' gazes turned toward Atlas. The sound of fruit being chewed. It was such a small sound that it wouldn't have been easy to hear if they hadn't been paying attention, but it approached them very clearly. Crunch, crunch, thud, Atlas's eyes gleamed in the rising smoke, as he chewed on the fruit that was sweeter than anything. The guy who had been thrown by Heracles was not only unharmed but was now emitting an even greater aura. So that's what that guy ate. It was a familiar aura. Yuan raised his head and looked up at the sky. The sky had turned purple. There was only one case when this sky appeared. Only when Outer used his power. That meant now, the golden apples of the Hesperides. The ones that are called in heaven as. The fruit that Atlas was eating was something from outside of this tower. The fruit of good and evil from Eden. Chapter 343. Asterisk. The golden apples had many names and symbols. On Olympus, they were known as the golden apples and symbolized beauty and wealth. In heaven, they were called the apples of good and evil and symbolized eternal life and salvation. In addition, various guilds considered the golden apples to be treasures with different names and symbols. That was why this 11th task to find the golden apples was the most difficult of all tasks. It should have been. Did he give up on his other plans? The golden apples were fruits that possessed power from outside the tower. Furthermore, each one had a mysterious power, which fascinated even high-ranking high-rankers. The golden apples were the problem. The conflict between the angels of heaven and humans. The rivalry between Hera, Athena, Artemis, and other high-rankers belonging to Olympus. All such things originated from those golden apples. And those were the plans of the foolish chaos. He invested more than I thought. Yuan and his colleagues called the golden apples, fruit. They planned to eliminate the fruit to prevent further internal strife caused by it. Of course, Yuan intended to eliminate all of the fruit during this task with Heracles. However, Atlas had eaten all of the fruit. Thud. And Heracles also needed the fruit. What are you eating? Whoosh. Swinging Yggdrasil's club, Heracles charged towards Atlas. Bang. Atlas, who was hit in the stomach by the club, was pushed back. Naturally, he dropped the fruit he was holding, and a fruit the size of an adult's head fell to the floor. It was a fruit that Atlas had already taken a bite of. Right after that, thud, thud, thud. Several golden apples fell out of Atlas's pocket, which was wide open. They were all things that Atlas had stolen. Click. Heracles picked up the fruit that had rolled to his feet. He had finally obtained it. The golden apple, the elixir that was only a legend on Olympus. This is strange. Heracles looked at his reflection on the surface of the golden apple, which was shining brightly. An elixir this is. He felt a strange feeling. It was definitely a treasure of the ages. For some reason, it felt like he was holding poison that he shouldn't touch. Something was rejecting it, and that was, hum. Yggdrasil's club in his other hand. My give it back. Thud. Atlas started to convulse. My give it back. The moment he saw the fruit in Heracles' hand, Atlas jumped up from his spot. Was it because he had eaten the fruit and regained his strength? Heracles' eyes widened at the sight of Atlas, who had closed the distance in an instant, and he hurriedly crossed his arms. Crash. Heracles' body was pushed back a few steps. It was the first time Yuan had seen Heracles being pushed back in a clash of strength. Swish. Click. Yuan absent-mindedly caught the fruit that flew towards him. In that short moment, Heracles had thrown the fruit to Yuan to protect it. I have to give you credit for your determination. Bang, bang, bang. Yuan watched Heracles and Atlas, who had started fighting again in front of him. At some point, Heracles had begun to be pushed back little by little. However, even as Atlas swung his fists at Heracles, his gaze was fixed on Yuan. Just in case, Yuan shook his hand holding the fruit. Swish, whoosh. Atlas's gaze followed the direction in which the fruit moved. Like that, several times. Yuan shook the fruit in his hand. But then, bought, another one from somewhere. There was a little guy who was after the fruit. Why are you here too? Bought, Baba. He made gestures asking for it. It looked like a child's tantrum, but the thing he wanted was the golden apple. That brat's acting like a spoiled child, but what he wants is the golden apple. Hercules offered his arm instead of his head. A fruit that is sweeter than any drug, hides greater power, and is more dangerous than any poison. Even if he drove a nail into his parents' hearts, he couldn't feed them something like this. Yuan pointed at Atlas with his finger. Don't you see that guy? Huh, if you eat this, you'll end up like that. Atlas rushed towards Yuan, drooling. Mine, give it to me. Boom, and then Atlas' jaw was struck by Hercules' club. Thud, thud. Atlas, who staggered back from the impact, shook his head a few times. He didn't seem to be that shocked, even though he had been hit in the jaw with a club. He ignored it and shouted with half-opened eyes. Give it to me. Screech. It was a scream that could burst eardrums. Yuan clicked his tongue and pointed at Atlas. Do you get it? HMPH. A regretful, steamy voice. But thanks to that, Yuan was able to discover another possibility. Then let's do this. Let's set a trap. Yuan looked at Atlas, who was clashing with Hercules. To catch a wild boar. Bam, clatter, clatter, clatter. Hercules, who was hit by Atlas' foot, was pushed back and flew away. It was the first time he had been pushed by someone with strength since he had climbed to the top of the tower and became a ranker. At first, it didn't feel like he was being pushed by Atlas, but as time passed, it felt like the opposite was happening. More than anything else, why doesn't this guy get tired? Hercules removed his arm, which had been protecting his body, and secured his vision again, and Atlas' figure was reflected in his eyes. Clang, a fist that stretched out in a straight line. Bang, bang, bang. Hercules felt his whole body ache from the fist that was swung at a frightening speed. His body, which was as hard as a rock, felt like it was cracking. It had been a long time since he had fought like this, body to body. Crunch, his grip on the club tightened. He felt his blood boiling. Hercules' eyes, which had been defending against Atlas' fist with both arms, sparkled. This guy's eyes are still on the golden apple. It had been a while since he had used his head like this while fighting. I'll aim for that blind spot. With his arms crossed, he observed Atlas' expression through a small gap. Atlas' head, which had been swinging his fist towards him, turned to the side. In the direction of Yuan. It was a moment when his mind was preoccupied with the one golden apple he had lost. Whoosh! Hercules broke his defensive stance and rushed forward. To swing his club with all his might. However, creak. Atlas' lips curled up, and as if he had expected it, he turned his head back and looked at Hercules. Their eyes met head-on. This guy, by any chance? Whoosh! A fist the size of Hercules' torso approached right before his nose. On purpose. Bang! He felt his consciousness fading for a moment. He had been defending himself the whole time, but it was the first time he had been hit so squarely. Hercules' legs gave out for a moment, and he saw Atlas' grinning expression. And that moment, bang, Hercules' club slammed into the ground. Smoke spread. Hercules had dodged for a moment. He was aiming for this. He seemed to be intoxicated by the golden apple, but was it all an act? He wasn't just a brute with strength. He was inferior in physical ability, stamina, and every other aspect, and even in strategy, he was one step ahead. It felt like he had fallen into a trap. What on earth was he fighting against? Growl. Atlas wiped away the smoke that had risen from his huge palm and bared his teeth at Hercules. And then, his teeth approached Hercules' head. Crunch. Instead of his head, Heracles offered his arm. The blood dripped from his torn bicep. It was fortunate that it was not ripped out, as it had a strong bite force. Pooh, ha ha ha. It was a laugh as if he had expected it. I knew it for sure. That guy had been aiming for it from the beginning. While drooling with anticipation to eat the golden apple as quickly as possible, he dug a trap to eliminate me first. I had become a beast caught in a trap without realizing it. What an annoying guy. Heracles put strength into his arm while sweat dripped from his forehead. The giant struggled, exploding his magic power, telling him not to lose to such a guy. However, snap, snap, Atlas' teeth did not let go of Heracles easily. As if he was going to bite off his arm and eat it. And Radon, who was guarding the golden apple, and the other golden apples. Heracles could clearly feel it through his teeth. This guy ate them all. The dragon, Radon, who was guarding the golden apple. And the golden apples that Radon was guarding. Atlas, who had eaten them all, had become a monster that even Heracles could not handle. That's when, thud, a small piece of stone fell over Atlas' head, who was biting Heracles' arm. Thud, thud, it looked like it had been thrown with all his might. If hit by that stone, most players might have had their heads cracked. However, Atlas' hard skin did not budge with that stone. Hey, swish, a beautifully colored fruit flew up. Clack, Eugene threw the golden apple lightly and caught it. It was an action to divert Atlas' gaze from Heracles, who was in danger. Look here, food, Atlas muttered dully, biting on Heracles' bicep. Atlas' eyes were slowly turning. The bite force on his bicep weakened, and Atlas' toes turned. Heracles had not thought of this situation at all. That idiot, Heracles muttered the worst curse he knew without realizing it. It was his role to draw attention. If there was anything for Eugene to do in this fight, it would probably be to prepare a spear. However, Eugene did not have a spear, let alone lightning, in his hand. I should have prepared a spear. It was too late to scold him belatedly. Thud, the direction Atlas was heading turned to Eugene. He didn't seem to be interested in Heracles anymore. I tried to catch Atlas, who was running towards Eugene somehow. Stagger. Heracles lost his balance for a moment due to his tattered bicep and the shock he received from Atlas. And that short gap was enough. Quang. Atlas kicked the ground and ran towards Eugene. Phew, Atlas, who was quickly closing the distance. Eugene exhaled briefly at the brute force. Then. Are you ready? He took out the trap he had prepared for the wild boar named Atlas, who was running towards him. Dan-ah, uses, divine power. Predator, drools. Chapter 344. Atlas flinched, thousands of teeth appeared before his eyes. They were blocking his path to the golden apple. Let go. He muttered incoherently. The golden apple floated in the air before returning to Wu Jin's hand. Atlas's eyes followed it. However, he couldn't bring himself to step towards the giant teeth in front of him. Eventually, thud, Atlas took a step back. He couldn't approach the predator before him. The moment he got any closer, he felt like he would be devoured. However, swish, something hard pierced Atlas's heel as he carefully took a step back. Crunch, crunch, his ankles were being chewed on. Atlas's eyes widened in surprise. It was then that he realized where he was. He was already surrounded by predators. The moment he realized that he was inside the mouth of a giant monster, Atlas began to struggle. Kua, he tried to jump up, but it was impossible. The predator that had bitten his foot wouldn't let go. The only way to escape was to cut off his ankle. As Atlas struggled to escape the trap. Sniff, sniff, a familiar scent stimulated Atlas's nose. It was a sweet and tempting scent. It was similar to the scent he had smelled from the golden apple. However, there was one difference. The scent was much more stimulating and intense than the golden apple. Gulp. Even in this life-threatening situation, Atlas swallowed his saliva. Where was the scent coming from? The direction was unclear. Like the fragrance from a garden full of flowers, the scent wafted from all directions. It was then that Atlas realized. He realized what the power he had been craving was. A moment later, roar, the predator's teeth, which had been surrounding Atlas, covered his giant body. Crunch, I got him. The predator's teeth had captured Atlas. Wild boar, Dan-ah, consumes divine power. Predator, begins predation. Divine power. It was the energy that Dan-ah possessed, and it was the driving force that allowed the predator to move. The predator had always used this power to move. It had been the same since Dan-ah was an egg, before she had hatched. Screech, screech, Atlas tore the predators that were clinging to his body with pure brute force. How strong was he? Wu Jin, who was using the predator, was drenched in sweat. He's tough. The predator didn't just feed on Dan-ah's divine power. It was also consuming Wu Jin's mana, and it was trying to devour Atlas. Of course, Atlas was different from the outers he had preyed on so far. He had killed Radon and eaten the golden apple that bore fruit in order to gain his current strength. In other words, Atlas had possessed remarkable strength among the giants even before that. However, even so, once he gains that power. Crunch, crunch. The predators clung tenaciously to Atlas's body. You are my prey. Crunch, caw. Atlas was covered by the predators, along with his head. There was no point in resisting any longer. And so, the predator's meal began. Crunch, crunch. It felt similar to when he had eaten the Yamata no Orochi. As if savoring it slowly. As the predator's meal continued, Atlas's resistance gradually weakened. Was it because he had used too much divine power to summon a predator of this size? Dan-ah, who had been full of energy, collapsed on Wu Jin's shoulder as if exhausted. You worked hard. Yuan tapped Dan-ah, who was half lying on his shoulder. Eat up now. Dan-ah's level has increased. Dan-ah's level has increased. Dan-ah's. Dana's divine power has increased by 4. The growth rate has increased by 18.98%. Mana has increased by 3. The fallen appetite has been eliminated. 300,000 points have been acquired. Clack, clack, it was unbelievable to see. What was happening now? No. What was happening? What the hell is that? Atlas was devoured by the ferocious-looking teeth. Atlas, unable to move, gave up his body and was now being eaten alive before his eyes. Although it may seem like it was wrapped in something like a black cloth from the outside. The fact that he was subdued in one breath was clear. Swish, it was then that he received the golden apple that flew before him in a daze. Snap, it was a golden apple about the size of an adult male's head, but it fit perfectly in Heracles' hand. Heracles turned his head, wondering what this was. Before he knew it, Yuan had approached him. Take it. What the hell is that? It's hard to answer, so let's just move on for now. Yuan didn't know much about the predator either. All he knew was that it wanted the power Atlas possessed, and he simply granted its wish. Of course, the answer was far from satisfying Heracles' curiosity. You don't know what you did. I don't know because I didn't do it. What? This guy did it. Yuan said so and pointed over his shoulder. Dana, who was drooping as if exhausted. Heracles bent down and looked at Dana like that. This guy did it. Pa, as if to say yes, I tried to answer vigorously, but well. He looked like he was exhausted. I couldn't believe it at all. This little guy had subdued Atlas. Heracles, who stood up again, asked with a look of doubt. Really, if I don't want to talk, I'll just keep my mouth shut. I don't lie, at least not to you. These words were sincere. It was Heracles, not anyone else. Yuan didn't think he would reveal anything he had asked him to keep secret or keep secret. There may be times when he doesn't open his mouth at all, like a clockwork, but he didn't lie or do anything because he didn't trust him. Well, if that's the case. Heracles nodded. Well, Yuan certainly tended to keep his mouth shut when he couldn't speak, but he didn't draw a clear line between knowing and not knowing. I don't know about other places, but at least in front of him, it was like that. And Heracles also did not ask about things that Yuan did not want to talk about. This time was no different. Heracles will no longer ask Yuan what he said he didn't know. And Yuan will not lie in response to Heracles' questions in the future. The relationship between the two remained the same as before and now. Clack, at the clear sound, Heracles' gaze turned to where Atlas was. In the dark mass where he was being devoured, the sound of his whole body being pierced by teeth was being heard. He was probably being eaten all over by a predator. Is it already over? No. Tisk, tisk. The predator that had wrapped around Atlas slowly receded. There's still the end. Atlas, who had escaped from the predator's mouth, revealed himself. Dark, dead skin and gruesomely twisted muscles. Heracles once again looked bewildered at the sight of Atlas staggering. What the hell happened? It certainly looked like he was being devoured by some unknown teeth, but that wasn't the case. Atlas's appearance, which had changed as if he had been imprisoned somewhere and hadn't had a sip of water for years, was a great shock to Hercules, who had just exchanged fists with him. Great power has great side effects. Side effects. That's it. Wu Wan nodded his head and pointed to the golden apple in Hercules' hand. Wung, wung. Even at this moment, the club of Yggdrasil was telling Hercules to be careful of the golden apple. Of course, he knew that this golden apple was not a simple fruit. Who would have thought it would produce such results? So, is that the side effect of the golden apple? To be exact, it's the side effect of having that power taken away. Taken away? By whom? Who else? No way. Hercules looked at Dana, who was drooping over Wu Wan's shoulder. She seemed to have fallen asleep and was making a faint cooing sound. Could this little guy, who was sleeping innocently, have taken away the power of the giant Atlas? I don't want to believe it. It's not that you don't believe it. Didn't you say you don't know what this guy is? At Hercules' words, Wu Wan realized what he was trying to say. It could be dangerous. Maybe. It was something he had been thinking about for quite a while. Dangerous. He's just a little guy who can fall asleep on your shoulder now, but what if he's not later? No one knew what would happen, not even Wu Wan. Well, there's nothing I can do about it. And knowing that, Wu Wan had no choice but to spare Dana. I wouldn't be able to win without doing this. Can't win. He asked what that meant, but Wu Wan didn't answer. Can't win. It didn't seem like he was talking about the fight with Atlas. After all, the fight with Atlas was as good as over. Wu Wan was talking about something far greater than Atlas. He doesn't seem like he's going to tell me. Wu Wen had said just a moment ago. He said he would keep his mouth shut about things he didn't want to talk about, but he wouldn't lie. This was the former case. Clank. Without pressing Wu Wen any further, Hercules took a step toward Atlas. Atlas, who seemed to be out of his mind, raised his head at the sound of Hercules's footsteps. I'm sorry it came to this. Bam! Hercules, who had gained strength in his hand, swung his club with all his might toward Atlas. Bang! Rumble! The ground cracked at the same time. The moment his head was hit, Atlas's body floated up and spun a few times in the air. Thud! Atlas fell down with a heavy thud. Hercules checked Atlas's condition. Atlas's weakened body could not withstand Hercules's club. The end of the remaining fight was really quick. Hercules put the club back on his shoulder and looked at the golden apple in his hand. This is the end of the 11th. The 11th task was much more difficult than he had thought. What would have happened if Wu Wen hadn't come with him? Would he have been able to defeat Atlas? Suddenly, the expression of Atlas, who had been laughing while biting his forearm, came to mind. His head drooped involuntarily. I still have a long way to go. Not enough. A lot more. It seemed that he had spent too much time cooped up in the mountains, cutting down trees. He wasn't even Zeus, and he was being treated like this by a giant whose name wasn't even known properly. I can regret it later. There was something he had to do now. Swish! Hercules turned his body. All that remained was the last task. Chapter 345. After Hera's visit to Olympus. A heavy atmosphere hung over Olympus. No one knew when the fight would start again. Clank! I wish we could just fight it out and get it over with. Athena, armed in heavy golden armor, muttered as she looked up at the empty sky. Behind her, the rankers of Olympus were lined up in full force. It was the first time even Athena had spent so long in full battle gear without fighting. Please be patient, my sister. It's better if this peace lasts as long as possible. Hargan approached Athena, who was radiating fighting spirit all by herself. Athena looked at Hargan, who approached with a pleasant smile. Pandora was stuck to his side. You two have been together a lot lately. Yuian told us to be together. Yuian. In an instant, two scenes flashed through Athena's mind. The battle at the Temple of Ares and the battle at the Pegasus Temple. Both had been caused by the same person. That guy. Pandora following that guy. It didn't make sense. Pandora was a woman that even Zeus couldn't control, so he had imprisoned her in the prison of Olympus. I don't like it, but thanks to him, we were able to stop Hera. I should thank him. I'm glad. Thank you for your help, my sister. Now that father is gone, I judge that the legitimacy lies more with this side. Athena had an old-fashioned personality. The reason she had followed Zeus until now was not only because he was her father, but also because he was the legitimate king of Olympus. And Hades was the one who succeeded Zeus as king. Athena didn't want Olympus to be shaken by Hades, Death and Hera. Is that so? Hargan's meaningful expression. In an instant, Athena's expression crumpled. What is it? It's nothing. Tell me. You always looked so difficult to approach, so I'm just glad to be able to talk to you like this, my sister. Zeus had many children. However, there weren't many siblings among them who were close. Most of them distanced themselves from each other and often saw each other as inferior competitors. Brothers who were truly friendly with each other were rare. Most of them kept their distance from each other and tended to regard each other as inferior rivals. Heracles muttered in a grim voice, clenching his fists. One day, they might compete for the throne of Olympus. Therefore, Hargan did not feel so bad about the current situation. I wish we could all get along well like brother Apollo and sister Artemis. Nonsense. They are traitors. They sided with Hera, who raised her sword against Olympus. Apollo and Artemis were currently out of the fight. It was because they could not fight their mother, Hera. However, no one thought that the two of them were out of the fight. In fact, the two of them were no different from siding with Hera. Athena, who had trusted them so much, felt a great sense of betrayal. Hargan looked embarrassed as Athena's mood changed when Apollo's siblings were mentioned. Athena looked as if she would draw her sword and aegis right away if the two were in front of her. That. Hargan, who hesitated for a moment, took out the player kit from his arms and checked the date. It had been 7 days since Hera led her troops to Olympus. It's about time. That was when it happened. Quack. A strong sense of evil from the collar of his clothes. When Hargan turned his head, Pandora shook her head. As if telling him not to. Then the words that had come up to his throat went back inside. She seemed to see through his thoughts. In the end, he decided to stop. Well, whatever. Hargan scratched his head in embarrassment, looking at Athena, who is thinking about Apollo and Artemis and getting angry on her own. Everyone will know in time. At that moment, inside the sun chariot, Prometheus, Heracles, who was applying medicine while examining his wound, asked with surprised eyes. It was his reaction after hearing a rough outline of the current situation from Yuan. I think so. Come to think of it, how did Prometheus know the location of the garden and tell him? It was strange, the garden that no one in Olympus had been able to find until now, he knew about it. Was it a trap from the beginning? That's what it seems like. When I get back, there's one more guy the first have to take care of. Thud, with the strength of my grip, Hercules muttered in a murderous voice. Yuan inwardly prayed for Prometheus, peace. Perhaps unknowingly, after all this was over, Hercules would search for Prometheus for a while. He would break his body in half in one breath if he were caught. What are you going to do now? Hercules, who had been determined, suddenly asked, his eyes shining. What, Hera, it seems like you've even dragged in the giants now. Yuan nodded. Judging from Atlas's movements, this had something to do with the giants. Above all, if the giants hadn't given up on the gigantomachy, things had become much more serious. I don't know if I should continue the task. His strong determination was shaken little by little. If possible, he wanted to finish all the tasks and make Hera give up on her own. However, with the gigantomachy involved, there was no longer any room for that. Maybe the great battle he had been worried about would happen before he could finish all the tasks. However, there's no need for that. Yuan shook his head at Hercules' words. There's only one left anyway, so just finish it. It'll be better for the future, too. What? Hercules looked at Yuan in surprise. It was him who had been stubborn about finishing the bet. Naturally, Hercules thought that Yuan would be happy if he gave up on his stubbornness and abandoned the tasks. But Yuan was stopping him, who seemed like he was going to give up on the tasks. Why do you think Hera made this bet? Why, well, to buy time. That can't be the only reason. This task wasn't that simple. Perhaps Hera thought that you wouldn't be able to succeed in this task. That would have definitely been the case if things had gone as planned. If he hadn't experienced the destruction of Olympus. If the staff of Yggdrasil hadn't been in his hands. And if Yuan hadn't been by his side. 9 times out of 10, he would have failed the task or, in the worst case, died during it. The Hydra, the Amazons, and Ladon, the dragon guarding the golden apples. Hydra, the Amazon warriors, and the dragon Ladon guarding the golden apples. Who he was. Just a few years ago, they would have been a formidable opponent for Hercules. In the process, I tried to kill you for sure. In any case, Hercules' task was a completely different kind of bet. You who finished the task and you who didn't are definitely different. Different, I asked the question, but there was no answer. Even this time, Yuan kept his mouth shut. In cases like this, Hercules nodded as if he was used to it and sighed. I knew it. Now he didn't even think about pursuing it any further. A secretive guy, but a guy who never lies. That was the image of Yuan that Hercules thought of. Hercules quickly withdrew his attention from the disconnected conversation and focused on taking care of his wounds. He took out the medicine from his inventory and started to apply it to his wounds. Hera knows more about this task than anyone else. And Yuan thought as he watched Hercules. Fighting Hercules who finished the task. Hercules who passed the 12 tasks. After obtaining the staff of Yggdrasil and completing the 12 tasks, he finally came close to the appearance that Yuan knew. She'll know too. How foolish it is. The bet of the 12 tasks was not simply a promise to give up. No matter how long it takes, Hera must have thought that it would be impossible to fight Hercules who finished the task. Quack. After a while, Hercules finished bandaging the wound he had applied the medicine to. He swung his injured arm a few times in the air. It was painful, but it wasn't enough to keep him from moving. It's definitely difficult to do anything with this arm right now. Hercules' expression became serious as he looked at his injured wound. There are gigantes among the giants. Don't worry too much about that. Even in an urgent situation, Yuan seemed too calm. As after the death of Hades, Hercules thought that there must be a reason for this. Why, one of the solvers is gone. Solver, you may not like it very much. In response to the question of who it was, Yuan explained about the solver. Who was he, and how did he recruit him? Once the short story was over, Hercules made a subtle expression. It was somewhat awkward. On the other hand, it was a face that seemed to be worried. Why, are you still not satisfied? No, that's not it. Then, Hercules' answer was delayed as if he was contemplating something. Hercules, who had been hesitating for a while, finally opened his lips that were heavier than a 1,000-pound rock. No matter what, I don't know if it'll be okay. Was that the reason? It was a much simpler problem than I thought. You'll have to trust him. Above all, that guy will be different from before. Having said that, Wu Wen got up from his seat. Fortunately, the persuasion was over without any problems. He had something else to do while moving. Wu Wen got up from his seat. What is that? Hercules pointed to the small root that had been in Wu Wen's hand for a long time and asked. It was a root that he had brought from the Garden of Hesperides after Atlas fell. This, as if it was a precious treasure. Wu Wen carefully lifted the root and answered. Ambrosia. Under the clouds of Olympus. A land where even the sunlight could not reach well, covered by thick clouds. That was where the giants who had been banished from heaven lived. Clank. A man wearing golden armor walked. It's been a long time since I came down. Clank. The golden armor was tarnished and badly damaged here and there. A few scars could be seen through the tattered armor. Thud. Familiar footsteps could be heard from afar. It was not a very pleasant sound. I'm going there myself. Originally, it would not have been something he would do himself. However, this time it was different. He hated being in debt by nature. Gigantomachia, the man, who had been lost in thought for a moment, began to walk again. Your fate is strange. Clank. The man walking down the high cliff brushed his disheveled hair back. Now, I'm in a position where I have to stop it. Chapter 346. The gazes of the giants who had been looking at Yerpa with fierce eyes turned in the direction of the voice. It's really time to stop now. The giants sat on the mountain. Among them, who had been raising their voices, an old man opened his mouth. In an instant, the hall became quiet. Everyone's gaze turned to the giant who had just spoken. It was Yerpa. What kind of story did I tell when I came here after a long time? Was it like that? A nobleman who had been stuck in a rural village and never came out. Why did you suddenly come here? Yerpa, I'm warning you, if you say something like that one more time, I'll break your legs right away. All the giants gathered in the place were high rankers who held a place in the giant race. None of them were afraid of Yerpa. Rather, there were some among them who ridiculed Yerpa. In any case, he was just a high ranker who had long since retired from the front lines and whose name was being forgotten. It's a fight that's already over. If you keep going, you'll only shed more blood. Yerpa, didn't I tell you to stop? Have you forgotten? Poseidon, that damn bastard, we lost our kin to him. Certainly, Yerpa had lost a lot in the fight against Poseidon. Numerous giants were submerged in water and crushed by the water pressure. The events of that time still haunted Yerpa as a nightmare. It was certainly an unforgettable past. That's why. However, that could not be a reason to continue the gigantomachy. Can't we let the children who are alive now die? Yerpa's voice did not waver an inch. The fact that he, who had not left the first floor for a long time since the end of the gigantomachy, had come this far was because he had made up his mind. The other giants knew that too, so there was no need for further words. It can't be helped. If our opinions don't match, there's nothing we can do. Yerpa, if you came here to persuade us, I wish you would go back. Yes, if only to prevent something really bad from happening. At their reply, Yerpa's eyes flickered briefly. Was it really inevitable? The relationship between Olympus and the giants was too twisted to be resolved through dialogue. Now, it had become a river that could not be turned back. It's a pity. That was when an unfamiliar voice was heard. The gazes of the giants, who had been glaring at Yerpa with fierce eyes, turned in the direction of the voice. It was a man armed with armor that was quite large for a human, though not comparable to the giants, and he was of considerable height and weight. Whether he had been injured somewhere, the armor the man was wearing was in tatters. If only we had talked it out, no one would have gotten hurt. What the hell are you? Wait. As several giants tried to get up from their seats at the appearance of a human who was not a giant, the largest giant sitting in their midst opened his mouth. Don't move, all of you. Rumble, 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 rumble. With a single word, he stopped the other giants' movements and raised his body alone. A giant as large as a mountain. Gigantes, one of the three greatest giants, who held the same position as the three gods of Olympus. He was one of them. I heard that Zeus was banished from Olympus. Zeus and Gigantes, the two of them had been fighting for a very long time. Even before the gigantomachy began, their relationship had been nothing short of bitter enemies. However, such Zeus came alone to the world of giants. That's right. Have you come back to grovel? To reclaim Olympus, which has abandoned you? Zeus must have lost in this fight. He was banished from Olympus. Hades and Heracles had led the charge, and the fallen king was no longer king. I don't miss it enough to yearn for such a position. Then, I have been asked a favor. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Zeus suddenly began to generate electricity. I hate being in debt. Especially a lot. This bastard, how dare you in this place? The giants rose from their seats. The fighting spirit of countless giants surged towards Zeus at once. There were more than 10 giants of high rank or class, and countless giant troops were preparing for battle around them. This was the heart of enemy territory. Have you come to fight us? Gigantes did not stop them. It was Zeus who had prepared for the fight first and generated electricity. If possible, he didn't want to make him an enemy again, but there was no reason to avoid a fight that was coming. As expected, if I must, Zeus had come here to fight. He was ready, but he didn't understand. He was ready, but he didn't understand. This wasn't a simple natural disaster. All of the thunder and lightning in the sky were like countless spears held in Zeus's hand. It was Zeus who had already abandoned Olympus. It was strange that he had returned, but it was even stranger that he had returned at someone's request. Who was Zeus? He was the one who had made Olympus the greatest guild on the server. He wasn't the kind of person who would move at someone's request. What kind of favor did you receive? I asked you to drop them. So that Gigantomachy won't happen again. Stop Gigantomachy, you're the one who's going to stop it. Gigantes laughed in disbelief, and Zeus nodded. Yeah. Normally, I would have thought it was a ridiculous request. But this time, it was different. Crackle, none other than me, Zeus. Golden lightning bolts flowed from his fingertips. In an instant, the lightning bolts, which had grown in size, dug into the ground between the giants. Flash, rumble, quote exclamation mark quote exclamation mark, quote, the sound was swallowed. In an instant, one of the mountain peaks that the giants had been leaning on disappeared. The screaming giants fell to the ground, their bodies charred and their consciousness blown away. It all happened in an instant. Although the fight had clearly started, the stadium was completely silent. No one could rush towards Zeus. The same was true for Gigantes, who had been fighting Zeus for ages. Creak. Zeus, who had fired the lightning bolts from his fingertips, approached the giants. I came here to warn you. Arrogance itself. But no one could point a finger at Zeus and call him arrogant. Now it's your turn to choose. Rumble, thud, thick, dark clouds covered the sun. A loud thunderclap could be heard from below. Crackle, crackle. Golden electricity flowed from Zeus's body. It wasn't the first time he had seen it. I had seen it so many times that it would even appear in my dreams. Zeus's thunderbolt was a symbol of fear for the giants. But, I've seen it before, but it's gotten worse. No matter what, it wasn't this bad. Rumble, rumble. The fierce thunder roared in the sky. Gigantes realized. This was not a simple natural disaster. All the thunder and lightning in the sky was like countless spears in the hands of Zeus. Will you fight me, Zeus, who had come alone to the land of the giants? He spoke to them as he held hundreds of thousands, millions of spears. Or, will you stop here? Zeus had moved to stop the giants. After learning that fact, Heracles became unexpectedly calm. While riding the sun chariot, Heracles closed his eyes to rest his tired body. The wound on his arm, which had been treated with medicine, had healed quite a bit in just one day. The wound, where the flesh had hung loosely and the bones were exposed, had healed enough that it no longer bled. I really have to appreciate my tough body. His physique was impressive no matter when he looked at it. Not only was it incredibly strong, but its recovery ability was also noticeably fast, as if he had used a skill. Of course, even that was not to his liking. Whoosh! Heracles swung his bandaged arm. A fairly strong wind blew along his arm. The wound, which had barely clung to his strength, opened up, and blood seeped out between the bandages. Hey, what are you doing with that body of yours? It's still far from enough. Whoosh! Once again. Heracles swung his arm. He then frowned again, as if he was still not satisfied. As expected, did he perhaps develop a desire for power because of this incident? If so, it was welcome. After all, Heracles' greatest weakness was perhaps his lack of desire. Thud, the sun chariot landed on the ground. Above, he could see the dark night sky. A damp and musty smell. And below, he could see the ground that was as black as the night sky. They had arrived. In hell. Let's go. Eurystheus took the first step. Yeah, Heracles followed behind him. Eurystheus looked around hell. He had not expected to come back to this place. The land that was the most difficult for humans to live in on this floor. That was hell, and Eurystheus also hated this world. Clank, clank, Heracles followed behind Eurystheus, who was heading somewhere with quite a fast pace. Do you know where you're going? The last of the 12 tasks was to capture the king of Kerberos. The hunt itself may be difficult or easy, but the problem was that there was no way to know where King Cerberus was right now. However, Yuan walked briskly as if the path had been set. I don't know where King Cerberus is. Then, instead, there is one person who might know. Someone who knows. Someone who knows where King Cerberus is. Yuan went down to hell without answering all of Hercules' questions. Anyway, he would know once he went there. Step, step, the path leading underground. Hercules felt a sense of familiarity. I've seen this place before. It was so long ago. When he first arrived in hell while climbing the tower. It was the path he had taken to meet his uncle, Hades, once. At that time, many Cerberuses attacked him. Hercules subdued them all after fighting for 3 days and 3 nights. And before such Hercules, are you Hercules, one of the 3 gods of Olympus? Hades revealed himself, as if he had been waiting for Hercules to subdue all the Cerberuses. Zeus has something to be proud of. That was the first meeting between Hercules and Hades. How nervous he had been at the appearance of the death god he had only heard of in stories. Until then, Hades and Hercules were as different as heaven and earth. Growl, growl, Cerberuses, showing their teeth at Hercules and Yuan, could be seen everywhere. They trembled in fear, Hercules, who had subdued them long ago. And Yuan, who had created the same history. The 2 of them were enough to scare them. However, they're not running away. The Cerberuses were scared, but they didn't hesitate to show their teeth. And then Hercules realized, creak, he stopped walking and looked at the Cerberuses showing their teeth at them. It was real, the existence that countless Cerberuses were guarding under this hell. He finally became certain. You're alive. Chapter 347. Growl, growl, the Cerberuses were still wary of Yuan and Heracles. Their bodies still bore the memories of being struck by Heracles, but they didn't retreat. It was to protect someone. Thud, Yuan took a step towards the Cerberuses. I'm not here to hurt you. Step aside. Growl, growl. The Cerberuses finally revealed their teeth. Numerous Cerberuses began to approach threateningly. They didn't seem like they would budge even if he used gigantification to threaten them. I have no choice. Gulp, thud, the strength of the giant fills your arms. In order to get rid of these guys in front of him right now, he had no choice but to use force. Yuan used gigantification and approached the Cerberuses. He was close enough to touch them if he stretched out his hand. That moment, creak, thud, the Cerberuses lowered their tails. Quote. The Cerberuses crouched down. Some of the Cerberuses split left and right and made a path in an orderly manner. It was as if they had received an order from someone. Come in. Far away, a strained voice was heard from deep underground. Yuan and Heracles followed the path that appeared before them. The stairs leading underground were so long that they couldn't see the end. And at the end of those stairs, a single, large, black door was waiting for the 2. Creak. Without hesitation, Heracles opened the door. Then, from inside, you have come. It was a much clearer voice than before. It was also a husky and familiar voice that he couldn't forget. Completely black walls, floor, and ceiling. There was only one thing in that large room. Father, on a large chair, a tall skeleton with almost no flesh was sitting upright. It was hard to see him as alive. But he was definitely not dead. It's regrettable that I look like this. The father of the dead, and the one who was like the king of this hell, was sitting there like this. Heracles, who had approached him, asked. What the hell happened? You can see it. I died. You died. Heracles turned his head and looked at Yuan. His expression was asking what had happened. Apparently, he said he would be alive. Yuan did not make eye contact with Heracles. Instead, Yuan looked at the tall skeleton sitting in the wide chair. Tut, tut, tut. The energy of the dead emanated from Hades' skeleton. He was definitely dead, but that was only for now. He'll come back to life. This time for sure. The king of the dead looks at the one standing on the border between life and death. The king of the dead is in awe of the one who has overcome death. Hades was overcoming death. He was dead, but he was not dead. After death, Hades was preparing for resurrection. Tut, tut. In fact, it was faintly visible to Yuan's eyes. Originally, only bones and flesh were attached to his body. The body, which had nothing, was gradually regaining its original form. Resurrection of the dead. Only one person in this tower. The one with the ability to overcome death and come back to life. That was Hades. Resurrection of the dead was a skill handed down only in legends. It was because it was unclear who had mastered it or whether such a skill existed. The dead come back to life. It might have been as unusual a case as his own return to the past. If there is a variable, it is that the opponent is the foolish chaos. Yu-1 was relieved to see Hades, who had turned into a skeleton. Fortunately, it was activated without any major problems. Resurrection of the dead could only be activated once. Overcoming death was not something that could be repeated so many times. Rather, it was nothing short of a miracle that no one in this tower could do. As he said, "This is the only time, but I am coming back to life." At Hades' answer, Heracles sighed in relief as if he had finally been able to relax. Somehow, this is enough. Now that Hades was confirmed to be alive, it was not so difficult to stop Hera. Hades, the new king of Olympus, had enough justification to drive out Hera just by his existence. Now, all they had to do was wait for Hades to be resurrected. But who the hell did this? Relief was short-lived. Heracles asked with a grim face about the unbelievable incident in which Hades was assassinated in the middle of Olympus. "I don't know. You don't know. You don't know." His hands did not feel anything. "That means you don't know who he is." He had an unfamiliar face and a name I'd never heard before. He was found dead in the middle of Olympus. And that meant the battle couldn't have been that fierce. There was no other way but assassination. Hercules realized once again that Hades' death was not a simple battle. But, Hades added, noticing Hercules' thoughts, "I wasn't assassinated." Hercules' eyes widened. "What do you mean? There's an easier way than killing a high ranker like the three gods without anyone noticing." The answer came from Ewell, not Hades. Erasing the witnesses. Hercules' eyes widened at Ewell's answer. Hercules looked at Hades as if to ask if that was true. He couldn't tell by his expression, since he was just a skeleton, but Hades didn't deny it. "You'll know if you see it for yourself." Tisk tisk tisk. A new color began to fill the black room. The interior changed in an instant. A large and tall hall. A red carpet and luxurious decorations. Hercules had been there once before. Olympus. The king of Olympus, Hades, fully intact, was sitting on the throne. Thud. A little further away, the hooded figure in front of Ewell revealed his face. The day Hades died, it was a memory of that day. I might as well hand it over. The scene started there. Ewell and Hercules could sense Hades' distress from that short mutter. And that was when, "I agree," the foolish chaos spoke. Hades had discovered the foolish chaos. Someone had appeared where there should have been no one. Quietly, without a sound. Hades was wary of him. "Who are you?" "It is my first time introducing myself. I have come in the name of Hera. I am called the foolish chaos." The foolish chaos. It was during that brief moment when he bowed his head in greeting. Quack. Darkness rose from the foolish chaos, shadow at Hades' gesture and enveloped him. In an instant, the foolish chaos, caught in the magic, disappeared without a trace. Swish. Hades rose from his seat. There was no sensation in his hand. "That's not how I usually bet." And so the fight began. Wah! The darkness surrounding the foolish chaos disappeared, and from within it, the foolish chaos, whose body was covered with a robe, reached out a hand. A huge purple wave filled the stadium. The smoke that spread like a fog swirled like a cloud and then became a tidal wave that swept over Hades. Sua! Hades, darkness and the foolish chaos, purple wave clashed. The impact of the magic power caused the door of the stadium to burst open. Hades Nim, what's going on? Thud, thud, the rankers and players of Olympus who entered the stadium collapsed one by one. Some did not lose consciousness, but they could not get any closer as if they were blocked by something behind the foolish chaos, which prevented other players from intervening. "I acknowledge your skills." Swoosh. A sharp sickle was raised. "It was a mistake to spare you." Clang. Hades, sickle and the foolish chaos, hand collided. The tips of the foolish chaos, hand, which had blocked the sickle with its grip, trembled. The impact caused the floor of the stadium to crack and the huge castle of Olympus to shake. But that was only for a moment. Crack, clank, the sickle of Hades, which the foolish chaos had grabbed, cracked. Dash exclamation mark. It's a waste of points, but. Clang. Hades, sickle broke. Your death will be worth more than that. Poof. The other hand of the foolish chaos pierced Hades' chest. Drip, drip, the blood from his heart fell to the floor. As he pulled out the arm that had pierced his chest, Hades' body tilted forward feebly. Thud. The foolish chaos looked down at Hades, who was lying on the floor and barely moving his fingers. Then, he looked around at the rankers and players of Olympus who had entered the stadium. Erase your memories of this place. Without a trace. With those words, whoosh, the purple fog that had filled the stadium began to spread outside. The fog spread to all parts of Olympus, and at the same time, the foolish chaos clapped its hands in the void. The blood-stained floor, and the cracked floor and walls. Creak, creak, creak. The cracked floor stuck together, and the traces of the battle disappeared. With your death, swish, the foolish chaos's foot stepped on Hades' neck. Now, Olympus will disappear. Thud, wah, the scene ended with Hades' neck breaking. In the scenery that returned, Hades' skeletal figure was seen. He lost the fight, but contrary to the foolish chaos's expectations, he did not die. I let my guard down. He tried to make excuses, but that wasn't the only reason. Even if I fought again, the result would not have been any different. Hades recalled his fight with the foolish chaos. On this wide chair where there was nothing to do, he thought and thought about the foolish chaos. Who the hell is he, and what is the power he used? What does it mean to say that points are a waste? I kept thinking about it, but I couldn't come to a conclusion. I didn't think the outcome would be any different if I fought again. But, Yuan's eyes didn't seem to waver much, even after seeing the foolish chaos. You see, you must have come looking for me because you knew I would be alive. Hades knew Yuan well. He didn't think he came here by mere coincidence. And it wouldn't have been simply because he was worried about his well-being. Do you need me in some situation? I do. The answer came right away. Hercules looked back at Yuan. Is it a situation dangerous enough that we can't do without Hades? A moment of silence. Yuan's lips went up. Not now, later. Later. It was a meaningful word. As if everything would be sorted out by then. Yuan said in a confident voice. After you have recovered and all the fighting is over, you can come back to where you were as if nothing had happened. Does that mean, yes, while working on the task with Hercules, Hades died, and the task was a mess. Olympus had suspended all activities due to Hera's fight with Gaia. I've been hit a lot so far. The 12th labor. When he received the request from Olympus, Yuan thought of this point as a turning point. If I can just get to this point, now, I will start to fight back. It was already half won. Chapter 348. What? Hera's expression hardened at the voice coming from the kit. What are you suddenly talking about? You're going to quit. The giants are dropping out of the fight. It was news that completely overturned everything Hera had done so far. Why all of a sudden? Zeus visited us. Hera's pupils dilated at the reply. Zeus he did, the former king of Olympus and Hera's husband. He hadn't shown his face anywhere in the tower for quite a long time. It had been a long time since he had escaped from Asgard's prison, but Zeus had never shown any interest in Olympus. But now he had suddenly visited the giants. An ominous feeling washed over her. I thought he wasn't interested in Olympus anymore. We don't know either. However, if we start this fight, we'll become enemies with him again, and that's a problem. Zeus is scared and is going to drop out of the fight. Are you giants talking? It was a series of incomprehensible events. Yes. It was possible that Zeus had returned. It was possible that he had been exiled once and had returned to Olympus because he couldn't give up on it. However, the giants were different. The three gods of Olympus were like mortal enemies to them. They had waged a war called the Gigantomachy, killing countless giants and taking their land. And Zeus was like the leader of those three gods. He's become a monster, so much so that we can't do anything about it. A monster. It was none other than Gigante's words. Hera, who had trusted the giants and started the fight, muttered in confusion. A monster. It had only been a few years since she had last seen Zeus. What on earth had happened in the meantime for Gigan to become so strong that he would say such things? She couldn't understand it. Hera was sure that there had to be another reason. Zeus said that if we didn't stop the Gigantomachy, he would wipe out the giants' race. And he actually has the power to do so. Zeus is trying to stop the Gigantomachy. It was none other than he who had caused the first Gigantomachy. We're going to drop out of this fight. We can't continue a fight that we have no chance of winning. Wait a minute, hey. The call was cut off there. Hera stared at the kit with its screen turned off and sat there with a blank face. And then, crash, she nervously threw the dishes and plates on the table, making a mess of the room in an instant. Damn it, damn it. Her eyes flashed red as she nervously trashed the room. Over her pupils, the image of a man she hated so much was reflected. Zeus. It was Zeus again. She had never loved him. And the same went for Zeus. Zeus had wanted to have Heracles through Hera. Hera had wanted to become the Queen of Olympus through him. They had joined hands because they both wanted something, but Hera had failed to create Heracles in the end. The contempt she had received because of that, and the indifference that followed. And at the end of it all, Zeus was trying to interfere with the great cause that she had been waiting for so long. Use the Apollo siblings. Whoosh! Hera turned her head. The sudden appearance of the foolish chaos was no longer surprising. With venomous eyes and words, she lashed out at the foolish chaos. Didn't I end up in this situation because I listened to you? Just because there's a variable, we can't stop. For now, we have no choice but to use the best cards we have. This, Hera, who had been about to lose her temper, shut her mouth tightly. It wasn't a wrong statement. If things continued like this, there were only two choices. Either step down, or bet everything and take the throne. The first option was absolutely unacceptable. If she stepped down now, Hera would never be able to return to her original position. I can do it without the giants. Apollo and Artemis. Apollo and Artemis. He smiled cheerfully, which did not suit the situation. The two of them were high rankers representing Olympus and were Hera's blood relatives. If the two of them joined forces, it would not be impossible to break through the royal palace guarded by Pandora. There is no way Zeus would be greedy for the throne again. Zeus did not return to Olympus right away but went to the giants. If he had been greedy for the throne again, he would have returned to Olympus right away. Without Zeus, it was still a battle worth fighting. What about Heracles? You must have taken care of him for sure. To Hera's question, the foolish chaos nodded and answered in a confident voice. There is no way he will come back alive. Good. Since it had come to this, she had no choice but to gamble from now on. Let's move. On the sun chariot, Iwan took out his player kit and answered the call. Is it over? Yes. A reply came from the other end of the kit. It was a voice that was not only beautiful but also emotional. He always thought that the guy's voice and actions did not match. Iwan realized once again that he was great. I never thought it would end this quickly. Thank you, even though it was the mess you created that I had to clean up. It would have been much nicer if you had just said thank you. We help each other. This time it was your turn to help me. Of course, I don't know about the other guys, but you deserve to say that. Zeus's voice through the kit sounded a little more excited than usual. Now that he had risen above the ceiling he had longed for so much. Zeus must have felt like he could fly. Is that guy's doing this time too? To Zeus's question, Iwan answered with conviction. Yes, then I'll have to scold him. It was a confident voice. The corners of Iwan's mouth turned up. I guess I'll have to. He had been dancing to the tune of the foolish chaos up until now. That guy must have known by now. He probably knew that Zeus had stopped the giants and that Heracles had broken the trap he had set. If so, there was no way the guy would let it go. This is it. The beginning of the counterattack. It was not just for Hera. Iwan looked down at Danpeng, who was sitting on his lap and dozing off. See you soon. Hurry, come on. Hera will lead the way. Let's take back Olympus. Rankers and players began to arm themselves. Each of them held a weapon in their hands and checked their numbers. The high rankers on Hera's side calculated the probability of winning the battle and what they would gain. Isn't Pandora on the other side? She and Athena will be taken care of by Hera. Apollo and Artemis are on our side too. We have the advantage in terms of strength. The guys who were under Ares are on our side this time too. Really? Well, this is the best chance for the guys who lost their hold. Hera cared a lot about Ares, too. That's good. The rankers were very excited about the prospect of becoming Hera's close aides after she became the new king of Olympus after winning this battle. But that was only for a moment. But hasn't it been getting a little hotter since earlier? Now that you mention it. The rankers who had gathered to go on an expedition felt something strange, one by one. And then, whoa! A huge wall of fire rose around them. Fire! Who did this? This fire is surely. It was a flame that the rankers of Olympus could not have missed. A pillar of fire hotter than lava, with a faint golden hue mixed in. Thud! A high ranker with golden hair walked into the pillar. No one can go outside from now on. Apollo, a high ranker of Olympus, symbolizing the sun. Please understand, everyone, he had a bright, inappropriate for the situation, smile. And at that moment, in another place, Artemis also began to move. What is going on? The interior became quiet as Hera exclaimed in surprise in the middle of the sun carriage. It was a sun carriage carrying dozens of people. No, to be exact, it was a replica made after Apollo's sun carriage. The sun carriage could not go any further and stopped in the middle of the sky. It was because of the sudden news. Apollo, Artemis, the troops that had been divided into several locations, including Hera's temple, were blocked. It was by Apollo and Artemis. My children betrayed me. They are still safe. There may be some misunderstanding, so for now. This is what they intended from the beginning. Apollo and Artemis had not been with Hera from the beginning. At that time, on the way to Olympus, Apollo and Artemis politely declined Hera's offer to move together. Along with the flimsy excuse that they could not move right away since Hades had just died. I should have noticed then. Fighting Olympus with this number of people, even without the giants, was like hitting a rock with an egg. If it weren't for Pandora, they would have had no chance of winning in their current state. How did it come to this? Olympus, which she had thought was an empty house after Hades' death, was guarded by Pandora. The support of the giants was blocked by Zeus. The siblings, Apollo and Artemis, cut off support from the inside, and they were stuck in the middle of the road, unable to do anything. Wung, that was when Hera's kit rang. It was a number she had never seen before. The eerie feeling running down her spine was not a mere illusion. It was Hera's intuition that had brought her to this point. Hera received the call on her kit. We are meeting for the first time, but I am greeting you like this. A voice she had never heard before came through the kit. What are you going to do now? Apollo and Artemis are gone. The giants have fallen away. It was a voice she had never heard before, but it was not difficult to figure out who the owner of the voice was. Are you Kim Yu-won? Yes. Pandora, Apollo and Artemis, Zeus, did you do all of this? If your instincts had been a little quicker, it wouldn't have gone that far. It's a bit disappointing. Yu-won did not deny it. Pandora, Apollo, Artemis, Zeus. The high rankers who dominated Olympus moved as Yu-won's pawns. In an instant, Hera felt goosebumps all over her body. The fact that she was standing like this, like a puppet with its strings cut, was created by a guy she had never even seen before. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood and hid her trembling voice as much as possible. What do you want to say? You must have contacted me because you had something to say. That kid says this. He says Heracles will not pass the task. He must be dead by now. A tone of voice that seemed to know everything. Hera knew who that kid was the moment she heard it. A foolish chaos. The guy who promised to kill Hades and take care of Heracles through the 12 tasks. Hera's pupils dilated at the fact that Yu-won knew him. No, the surprise did not end there. Heracles told me to tell you. He is about to start his final task. Final task. The test to capture the greatest monster in hell, the Cerberus King. But for Heracles, it might be the easiest test. And the fact that he started it meant. Get your neck ready, auntie. It meant that the task was already over. Chapter 349. Click. The phone call ended there. A ringing filled Hera's head. It seemed like the sound of Yu-won's voice through the kit earlier continued to echo. Hera was at a loss for words. The other rankers approached her cautiously. Are you okay? Don't worry too much. There's no way Lord Apollo and Lady Artemis would betray Lady Hera, right? That wasn't it. Their attempts at consoling her were all useless. He's coming. Yes. A small mumble that couldn't escape her mouth. Heracles. With a pale face, she muttered the same words. Heracles is coming. Now that all her plans had failed. Hera had no way of stopping Heracles anymore. 5 days had passed since Hera's departure. Silence flowed through Hera's temple on the 77th floor. Even the players at the bottom knew that the situation wasn't good. The fact that there was still no news after 5 days was proof of that. It was possible that the battle they had started would end in defeat. If that happened, all the status they had built up in Olympus would be for nothing. What are we going to do if we lose? What can we do? We have to go out and find another guild. But by then, we'll have already been marked by Olympus. Does that matter right now? We might be able to survive. True. Should we just leave now? Are you kidding me? Do you think Hera will let us go? Most of the players that had come up to the 77th floor were treated well no matter which guild they went to. However, establishing a position in the guild and getting in line with the high-ranking rankers was a different matter. It took a lot of effort and time. The problem was that at this point, it would be difficult to build up a position in another guild and fit in properly. If they were recognized as, that guy got kicked out of Olympus, it would be even harder to find a place in any guild. Anyways, we should just stay here and wait for news of victory. Even if we lose, we can surrender to them. Joining another guild is definitely. Anyway, we have no choice but to guard this place and wait for the news of victory. Even if we lose, we'll surrender to them, but joining another guild is absolutely. We didn't have enough strength to head to Olympus, and returning to the temple was problematic. Absolutely not. Whoa, the startled man screamed and instinctively distanced himself from the direction of the voice. Even in this confusing situation, he reacted like this, which seemed like an upper-level player. Who is it? State your name. Swish, swish. Numerous players pointed their spears and swords at once. There were also some rankers mixed in among them who hadn't gone on the expedition. It seemed that they hadn't completely emptied the temple in order to reclaim the throne, so there were quite a few of them. Yuan, who was being targeted by numerous spears and swords, shrugged. Choose the lesser of two evils. It's a fight that's already over anyway. At Yuan's words, the players surrounding him glared. Over. What kind of guy is this, going around without a sword by himself? Kim Yuan, huh, some players recognized Yuan. Yuan was a high ranker who had entered the top 100 of the rankings, and he had become famous enough that a search on the kite would yield quite a lot of information about him. Of course, most of the information was about how his identity was unknown or how he had become recognized as a high ranker in the shortest amount of time, but his face was also somewhat known. As his name gradually spread. Really, we're screwed. What can we do against a high ranker in the double digits by ourselves? Just hearing his name was enough to make them lose their will to fight. That was the power that high rankers possessed. Of course, there were bound to be some fearless guys mixed in among the group. No, to be precise, they were rankers who were strongly loyal to Hera. Don't be afraid, the opponent is only one person. We have dozens of rankers on this side. We have a good chance of winning. Bam, the ranker who had been shouting to boost the morale of his allies suddenly felt his vision spinning. For a moment, he saw stars, and then he lost consciousness. Yuan, who had knocked out the ranker by punching him in the jaw, clicked his tongue as if he was disappointed. Dozens, my ass. There are barely more than 10 of you. The number of rankers remaining in Hera's temple was only about 10. Most of the others had gone on an expedition to reclaim the throne. Right now, Hera was in a situation where she couldn't go this way or that. Currently, Hera was in a situation where she couldn't go either way. Around the time she counted to about 5, Olympus lacked the strength to head towards it, and returning to the temple again would be problematic. In the end, she ended up losing her way in the middle of the tower and continued to waste her remaining strength. Of course, Yuan didn't make a move to take over this temple. Crackle, black lightning shot out through the cold ring in her hand. The lightning that went up into the sky through the tip of her hand soon created a smoky cloud. Rumble, boom, rumble, thunderclouds. The thunder and lightning made of enormous magic power was a sign of a skill that Olympus players couldn't ignore. Lightning, it's a bit different, but, right. The old Olympus players who experienced Gigantomachia. They clearly remembered the sign before Zeus's lightning was cast. And the reason that memory was strong was because the power of the lightning was outstanding. From now on, except for those who have great loyalty to Hera, or those who are confident in defeating me, I ask that everyone get out of the way. Some of them might have joined the Olympus Guild just because they thought it was a safe haven. Yuan could only go so far. From now on, once I count to 10. Swish, the tip of a spear flew towards Yuan's face. That moment, crack, lightning struck down from the dark clouds. The body of the ranker who flew towards Yuan with a spear was burnt black and fell to the ground. The spear couldn't even get close to Yuan. He must have tried to surprise her in the middle of her speech, but no matter how fast he was, he couldn't be faster than lightning. You'll all end up like this. Not me. Loyalty my ass, surrender. Surrender isn't the problem, let's run away first, you idiot. Players started to run away in droves. Most of the ranker level players remained in place. They were the ones who followed Hera with loyalty to her in the first place. On the other hand, to those who followed the halo of Olympus and the benefits that came with it, a threat to their lives worked the best. There was no need to even count to 10. The players, who had much greater physical abilities than ordinary people, had dazzling speed when running away. At around the 5th count, Yuan's eyes could see the ones who would escape and the ones who would stay. Will you all stay? At Yuan's question, dozens of players and 5 rankers pounded their chests. We have devoted our lives to Hera. Death is not something to be feared. The only thing to fear is KWA rung. The sound that followed was swallowed by thunder. There was no need to hear any more of their answers. A storm of lightning bolts rained down from the sky. It swept away the remaining rankers and players. Yes, if that's the case. Thud, thud, Yuan walked through the charred temple garden. The vast temple of Hera fell silent. Everyone who was going to leave because of the commotion just now had left, and all that remained was Yuan. And Yuan had business in this temple. Creak, he opened the heavy door and entered to find the one remaining presence. A ceiling that seemed as high as the sky. The walls of the temple were beautifully embroidered with cloud patterns and red lines of bright sky blue. Yuan walked into the empty temple and looked at the chair that seemed to have been Hera's seat. As if she were a king herself. She had decorated her seat as gorgeously as a throne. And as Yuan examined the empty seat, he noticed a single mark. It was here just now. A scratch on the armrest. It looked like a scratch from a fingernail. It wasn't Hera's. It was a sharp mark that looked like it could have been made by a beast. Furthermore, it wasn't very old. Escape it couldn't be. Flicker. Yuan turned his head and his eyes met with the Wanmongjang. Is it going to disappear like this again? Every time things went wrong, the thing would hide. However, this time it was different. That can't happen, right? But, from within Yuan's arms, Dana stuck her head out. A confident voice. The one who had been exhausted from the fight with Atlas had transformed into a more vibrant form than before. It's been a while. Please take care of me, Radar. Quote. Radar. Dana looked up at Yuan with a face that seemed to be asking what that was, as if it was the first time she had heard the word. It was impossible to find the foolish chaos that had hidden its presence with just the Wanmongjang. But if Dana was there, it wasn't impossible. You've wandered around enough. Thud. Yuan's steps headed towards the outside of the temple. Now, the predator shows its teeth. Yuan started to move, following the predator's appetite that he had been hiding inside him. I'll find you on this side. An unexpected number of people visited the Temple of Ares. It was thanks to Hera, who was heading to Olympus, and the numerous players who followed her, all turning their direction to the Temple of Ares. In the cramped temple, they hurriedly found rooms to accommodate them. Even without Ares, it was no ordinary task to accommodate this many people in the chaotic temple. Where is Lady Hera? She's in her room, but her condition isn't very good. Hera's subordinates, who came looking for her, all had the same reaction. Her condition was a mess. He's coming, Heracles is coming, Heracles. A few days ago, she had been in the same state ever since she received the contact on the Sun Chariot. A reaction filled with fear. She wasn't in a state to meet anyone. Those who came worriedly turned back, hoping for a later time. Hera was wrapped in a red cloth all over her body, trembling in her room. Hera's salvation, an item that was considered one of the best in this tower for its defensive and recovery abilities. Without it wrapped around her body, Hera's body was trembling like an aspen tree. There's no way. Heracles is coming. He's after my neck. But there was no way to stop it. Heracles, who completed the 12 labors. He must have become an even greater monster than before. Now, she had no device or power to stop him. Things had happened, and all the safety measures she had were gone. The bet with Heracles was over. Since she had played a trick on the task, the ending wouldn't be clean either. All that was left now was to wait for his judgment. And then, boom, the ground shook. A thunderous voice was heard from outside the temple. Hera, Heracles, he had finally come looking for her after completing all the tasks. Chapter 350. Saint, stop him, there's only one opponent. Charge at him all at once. The guys in the back, get into position. There was only one opponent. It wasn't something a weak and docile flock of sheep could say to a hungry dinosaur. Just the size of the dinosaur in front of them was too big for them to overcome their fear with just numbers. Kwang, as he swung his club, the rankers who had been running at him were blown away. Then, ranged skills that had been in position poured over Hercules' head. A sea of fire swept over Hercules' body, and a tremendous pressure was applied from above. Kukunkang, the ground sank down, crushed. The players cheered as they looked down at Hercules, who was caught in the flames. We did it. He recklessly charged in by himself, but he looks like crap now. Fools, do you know who you're dealing with? At that moment, a roar was heard. The opponent is Hercules, a monster who slaughtered millions of giants. Thud, from the sunken pit came a heavy thud that sounded like it could have come from a giant. So you're talking nonsense about getting rid of him. Thud, the ranker who had been speaking suddenly felt as if the ground beneath his feet was sinking. He briefly thought, no way. Thud, once again, the same vibration echoed from beneath the ground. Cuckoo quack, the ground sank, and numerous rankers and players fell into it. The ground, eek, save me, I have a skill. Anyone with a flying skill. Hurry. In an instant, the battlefield turned into a scene of chaos. Hercules jumped up from the ground with both feet. Players falling down, and rankers with flying skills desperately trying to save them. Hercules looked down at them and muttered, "Stay down there for now." Crunch. Hercules's footsteps headed towards the temple where Hera was hiding. The inside of the temple was empty. Apart from a few rankers guarding Hera, everyone else had gone outside to stop Hercules. Swish. Of the many rooms, Hercules opened the door to the one in the farthest corner. A small room that didn't suit Hera, who had been adorned with beauty and luxury all her life. But that was the answer. "You've come." Inside the room, embroidered with red cloth. Hera was waiting for Hercules in it. Was it a struggle not to look ugly? Her voice was trembling, but she was doing her best to speak and act so that she wouldn't look like that. "Why did you do that?" Crunch. Hercules stepped into the room. And at that moment, Hera's salvation binds your body. Jajorararik. Jajoa. Thousands, tens of thousands of threads flew in and wrapped around Hercules's body. But that only lasted a moment. Jiak. Hera's salvation, which was known to be unable to cut anything, was snapped by Hercules's brute force. "You clearly promised me." Thud. JJIK. JJIIK. Hercules, who was so easily tearing the red cloths and walking towards her, step by step. Except for when he was fighting giants, he was known to be kinder and warmer than anyone else, but in Hera's eyes, he looked like a more fearsome monster than any demon. Quote! Salvation didn't work. She thought she could at least hold out for a little while. But the opponent was Hercules. He had also passed all 12 trials and written a new myth. Crunch. Once I finish this task, I'll give up everything. Don't come. Don't come. Hera added more magic power to the red cloth. Threads that were harder than steel and tougher than spider webs clung to Hercules's body. In a room where even a giant monster couldn't move, Hercules moved as if nothing was wrong. Jiak. But why did you do that? It was a loaded question. Hades, death, the regaining of the throne, and even the sabotage of the task. Heracles, task was never a fair gamble. If you hadn't done something like this, I wouldn't have cared what you did. I tried to be patient. To avoid bloodshed if possible. To end this fight as peacefully as possible. That was why Heracles remained neutral in the fight between Hades and Hera from the beginning. Because the moment he intervened, there was no telling how far this fight would escalate. If you sit on the throne by fair means. I didn't care who became king. Before performing the task, Hera came to me. Would you like to bet with me? A bet. Heracles, who was cutting wood in a secluded forest, listened to her. Perhaps there was something he could do. I'm starting the task. 12 tasks. Yes. If you pass all of those tasks, you will no longer cause any strife. I didn't have to think long. Heracles put down the axe he was holding and immediately began the task. That's how Heracles, who had remained neutral, began to move. You said it yourself. If you truly desire peace, complete the task. Gik. The red cloth was torn to shreds. The street was just around the corner. I was wrong. Heracles realized from this incident that sometimes blood had to be shed for peace. Because he wanted too much peace. Because he was too ambitious, Olympus had come to this point. If it weren't for Eugene, it wouldn't have been strange if Gigantomachia had started again. And Hera had been aiming for that weak point of Heracles. Even if I hadn't tried to raise Gigantomachia again, I would have stopped here according to the results of the bet. I don't know about anything else. I couldn't tolerate attracting the giants. Hera also knew of Heracles' weakness, so she tried to eliminate Heracles first through the task. Still, thanks to that, I learned one thing. Sometimes violence is more necessary. Oh no, I've been patient 3 times. Boo Wang. Juk. Heracles, club spattered blood. Who do you think I am? A fertile and pleasant land was always crowded with people. The 77th floor, where Hera's temple was located, was one such world. A bustling city where millions of people lived. Eugene flew over the roofs of the buildings that made up the city. Pot. Eugene, who slid his feet quickly, headed for the next roof. Numerous people passed beneath the roof. The scenery flashed by in an instant, and Eugene ran at full speed towards one place. How long had he been chasing like that? Wang. Suddenly, the player kit in his arms rang. It was a message that I would have ignored normally, but it was a contact I had been waiting for. Without stopping moving, Eugene took out the kit from his arms and checked the message. Heracles. Hera has been dealt with. I didn't think Heracles would finish the job before me. Well, it's not difficult to catch Cerberus King. Although one arm was injured, Cerberus had been a monster that hadn't been very compatible with Heracles since long ago. Furthermore, Hades had revealed the location of the Cerberus King. Thanks to that, Heracles was able to finish the task quickly, and immediately after finishing the task, he moved to find Hera. There were two things Heracles gained through this task. Has this fixed his stuffy personality a bit? The first was Heracles' personality. Justice and foolishness were just a step away from each other. And up until now, Heracles had been overly timid except when fighting the giants. However, in any case, Heracles made a decision through this incident. He learned a sense of powerlessness in the fight against Atlas, and he learned decisiveness in the bet with Hera. They were all stimuli that Heracles needed. And next. Heracles got mythology earlier than I thought. Mythology. Breaking through the ceiling, one of the many conditions for becoming a god. By clearing all 12 tasks, Hercules fulfilled one of those conditions. The growth resulting from that would probably be even steeper than when he had obtained the Club of Yggdrasil. You must grow more than you are now. Hercules. Yuan, a powerful high ranker who had been considered as a candidate to go back to the past along with Son Goku. His growth was one of the homework Yuan, who had returned to the past, had to solve. Although it wasn't his intention, he had solved one of those homework on the stage set by the foolish chaos. Now, only one thing remained. Poof. It was to deal a direct blow to the foolish chaos. Thud. Yuan, who had been running on the roof, suddenly came down. A few people filling the street glanced at Yuan and quickly turned their attention away. To 77th floor players, flying in the sky was as easy as walking. It wasn't something to be amazed by. Thud, thud. Yuan's steps were much slower than before. In the crowd filling the street, there was one person who stood out to Yuan. Are you really going to keep following me? A person wearing a dark robe that stood out among the crowd. Yuan took a step towards him and opened his mouth. Slowly, and clearly, the foolish chaos didn't put any more distance between himself and Yuan. Even if he tried to get away, Yuan wouldn't let him. It had been a mistake to leave Hera's temple late. But he had something he believed in. If we fight here, many people will die. The reason he had stopped in the middle of the street. Is that okay, Apostle of Justice? It was because the foolish chaos knew Yuan well. Yuan was fighting for this tower. He didn't know why, but his purpose was clear. That was why the foolish chaos was sure that Yuan wouldn't sacrifice innocent residents. However, are you really going to fight here? Yuan's reaction was a little different from what he had expected. Yuan turned his head and looked around. It was still early. As it was a city with a high population density, numerous residents were walking around the street. If he fought here, they would get involved. If you touch the residents, the administrator might intervene. Thud. Yuan closed the distance between himself and the foolish chaos without any hesitation. I don't care about that. The foolish chaos tried to get away using the residents of this place as hostages, but that was like putting a noose around his own neck. Administrator. The beings outside the tower who were the most wary of, the actual rulers of this tower. They didn't interfere much in the fights between rankers or players, but it was a different story when it came to powerless residents. If a ranker or a high-level player attacked the residents of the floor they ruled, the administrators would definitely punish them. If it wasn't even a ranker but a being from outside the tower, it went without saying. You're the one who has more to lose. The foolish chaos was conflicted. And Yuan was sure of the decision he would make after that conflict. Bringing in the administrator is a decision that's 1,000 years too early for you guys. Besieged on all sides. It was the perfect phrase to describe the situation the foolish chaos was in right now. The beginning might have been as he pleased, but the end couldn't be as he pleased. The choice of whether to end the fight or not was up to this side. And Yuan planned on continuing this fight. Now. Creak. Yuan's steps stopped right in front of the foolish chaos's nose. And at that moment, Predator has found its prey. Yuan's fangs twitched inside him, facing the foolish chaos. What are you going to do? Chapter 351. Cheek. Yuan and the foolish chaos left the city. After running and flying for a while, they arrived at a mountain range so far away that the city looked like a dot. How did you find where I was? His pace slowed, and the foolish chaos, who had been running ahead, turned around again. It seemed that he was quite curious. Is that also the power of the one golden bell? He must have been proud to know everything in the world. The same went for the one golden bell. The foolish chaos had been watching Son Goku for quite a long time. His immortal power, the Ruyi Bang, the somersault cloud, and even the one golden bell. All of them were things that were threatening even to the outer gods. However, in none of what he had learned so far did the one golden bell have such an ability. No matter how much he saw through the world, the outer gods were beings who were originally outside the category of the world. It was impossible to track down the foolish chaos with just the one golden bell. Well, of course, Yuan had no intention of answering his question directly. How about it? A slow answer. In that short time, the foolish chaos's robe fluttered. Swoosh, cheek. The hem of the robe he was wearing was cut off. A single red line cut through the spot where the foolish chaos had been until a moment ago and chased after him. The gaze within the robe turned to the owner of the sword. Susanoo. He curled his lips as he chased after the foolish chaos. It's been a long time. Swish. Susanoo, who had been right before his eyes until a moment ago, disappeared from his spot. Like a ghost, Susanoo, who had disappeared from the void in the blink of an eye, reappeared behind the foolish chaos. I missed you, very much. Quack, creak, the corner of the mountain range behind the foolish chaos was cut off. One side of the sliced mountain range tilted and slid down smoothly. Thud, the ground vibrated. Susanoo, who swung the kusanagi in the rising dust, turned his head again to find the foolish chaos. And again, spot, Susanoo relentlessly swung his sword after the foolish chaos. Yes, we were old friends. Swish, quack. As if passing its body through the gaps between the cobwebs, the foolish chaos moved its body here and there to avoid the kusanagi. Is there even a Wanjiamjung? Susanoo's sword tip was irritated by the sword that could not be reached. Do you dare play with me? You are not the only one. Swish, swish, Susanoo's nape, who was wielding the kusanagi, was caught. The distance narrowed in an instant. Susanoo, who was wielding the kusanagi, hesitated for a moment in embarrassment. And in the meantime, everyone in this tower, Wung. The foolish chaos lifted Susanoo's body with all its might and threw it on the floor. It was in the palm of my hand. Bang, Susanoo, who flew towards the cliff, was buried under the collapsed rock. And in that short time, a black line flew from somewhere. Splash, crackle, the outstretched palm blocked the lightning. A tingling sensation was transmitted through his hand. Then, the foolish chaos's gaze turned to the distant mountain peak. Except for one, Yuan was seen holding another spear from afar. Yuan was definitely annoying. It wasn't a matter of being strong or weak. There were plenty of rankers stronger than Yuan. Hades, who I fought a little while ago, was a high ranker similar to Yuan. Furthermore, compared to the top-ranked high rankers such as Heracles, Zeus, Son Goku, and Odin, they are still at the level of children. Nevertheless, the foolish chaos was most wary of Yuan. There is only one reason. I can't read it. It was because he couldn't read Yuan's actions or thoughts. It was the same this time. In the end, it was himself who lost in the water fight. He tried to revive the Gigantomachi using Hera, but in the end he failed. Lastly, I wanted to destroy Olympus, but even that failed when Heracles caught Hera. Well, the head of the foolish chaos that threw Susanoo went up. Sizzle, maybe it's a good thing. The sky began to turn purple. Under the sky, Yuan threw another spear. Splash. Crackle, crackle, the electric shock emitted from Uranus squirmed in his hand. There was no visible impact. Wu Yun repeated clenching and unclenching his fists with regret. Is this not enough? It was difficult to give him a proper blow unless it was a thunderbolt from Zeus. Even after using Uranus several times, he still couldn't overturn the fundamental difference in magic power. Furthermore, he still lacked proficiency in the speed of creating thunderbolts. Wu Yun's mind was filled with the huge thunderbolt that had fallen on Camelot. A big thunderbolt like that time. Crack, crackle, crackle. The lightning created in his hand shot up high. It was a spear that was much faster and larger than before. But then, swish, the wind stopped, and the flow of air changed. This phenomenon was a long time coming. He looked up, just in case, but as expected. Whoosh, the color of the sky was turning purple. It started. The foolish chaos began to exert its power in earnest. The flow of mana scattered in the atmosphere twisted, and a completely different scent flowed. Wow, a pleasant voice. Dan Peng got out of his arms and jumped on his shoulder. Wu Yun didn't bother to stop Dan Peng. Dan Peng's existence was one of the keys to this battle. That guy shouldn't be late either. Crack, crackle, crackle. Wu Yun did not stop creating the spear. In his hand, the lightning continued to grow. Even though he couldn't have missed it, he stood there blankly and watched Wu Yun. This is where it starts. Whoosh, the foolish chaos pulled back the robe it was wearing. And that moment, crash, The lightning that Wu Yun had clenched in his hand flew away. Boom, zing, the lightning hit its mark. In an instant, the lightning that left Wu Yun's hand seemed to pierce the body of the foolish chaos. However, zing, a purple haze flowed around Wu Yun. Clothes of the four spirits resists. Opening square bracket question mark. Cannot be identified. Clothes of the four spirits fails to resist. Clothes of the four spirits. An item with a mysterious power that could resist all types of attributes. However, this purple haze was not any type of attribute. Wu Yun hurriedly raised his magic power to push away the haze. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Clang, Heart of Oranos resists. Blessing of the Sea, resists. Holy Fire, resists. Resistance is partially successful. It resisted a little, but it was successful. This was the only chance. Clang, Yuan drew his sword and wielded the Holy Fire. Out of the various skills, the Holy Fire had the greatest effect. Bang, as he swung his sword with all his might, the purple mist surrounding him was cut. At the same time, Yuan used this opportunity to fly away. And in the meantime, oof, Dana patted her full belly while lying on Yuan's shoulder, who was still floating in the air. Growth rate has increased by 0.004%. Dana's growth rate had increased by a very small amount. It seemed that she had eaten the purple mist that Yuan had taught her about. That was delicious. Her master was fighting hard, but she was the only one eating. In times like this, she wanted to pinch her cheek. Thud, Yuan used Hermes' footsteps to step on the sky. Yuan, who had landed on another mountain peak, looked up at the sky, which had completely turned purple. Tisk, the sky split open, and at that moment, Dana, who had been patting her belly on his shoulder, suddenly stood up. Wow, her eyes sparkled. It was as if she had found a fun new toy. And as expected, crack, a purple wave appeared beneath the split sky. Are they the outer gods? The beings outside the tower, who didn't even have names. They were the ones who had come through the crack in the sky. And among them, there are even some big fish mixed in. There seemed to be quite a few named beings among the outer gods. They're really determined. He had thought that it wouldn't be easy from the moment he started fighting. But he never thought it would be this much. Yuan's rank was similar to Hades. No, to be exact, it was a little lower than Hades. But even so, the foolish chaos was pouring out enough power to capture several Hadeses. He must be wasting a lot of points. I guess that means he's aware of me to that extent. If he couldn't avoid the fight, he would make sure to capture Yuan here. It was a wise choice. Even if it was a bit of an excessive investment, if we can catch Wu Yun here, there will be no variables in the plans going forward. Well, thanks to that. Wu Yun glanced at Dan Peng. You have a lot to eat, don't you? Yeah. Dan Peng nodded his head violently. The wave of outer gods that appeared before his eyes must have looked like a delicious feast to Dan Peng. Wu Yun tempted Dan Peng with that feast. This time, don't just play around. You have to work with me. Wah, at those words, Dan Peng pouted as if he was annoyed. It seemed like he was tired because he had fought Atlas not too long ago and had become exhausted. However, if you don't want to, then don't. You can just run away. Ababa, WHAAA, BBAK. This time, Dan Peng had absolutely no intention of just standing around and watching. Up until now, it had been enough to just place a spoon on a well-prepared table. Dan Peng's strength was absolute in a fight against the outer gods, unlike any other fight. And that was exactly the insurance he needed to fight the foolish chaos. And also at the same time, if I do well, I might be able to fill up my growth rate this time. Dan Peng's growth rate had been sluggish and hadn't been going up. This was an opportunity to raise it to 100%. Thud, Wu Yun took a step towards the countless outer gods that filled the sky. This situation right now, it wasn't that unfamiliar. Reminds me of the old days. The sky had turned purple. The beings outside the tower that shook the sky and the foolish chaos that commanded them. And even the sight of himself walking towards them. Before returning as a clockworker, it was a similar situation to when he had fought the outer gods. Of course, back then, Heracles, Son Goku, Odin, and Asura. They had all been together. Well, even so, glance. I'm not completely alone. Although they weren't a team, he had the most reliable comrade. Wu Yun looked at Dan Peng who was sitting on his shoulder. I'll leave it to you. But, as if to tell him to only believe in himself, the guy confidently answered while putting his small hands on his waist. Wu Yun let out a small laugh at Dan Peng's response and looked up at the sky again. It was the moment that the first battle with the outer gods began. Chapter 352. Point. A numerical value that quantifies the power of the outer, which allows them to exert influence over the other world. I learned about it during a battle with the outer. Apparently, those guys have something called points. Points. In that case, we also. It seems to be a completely different concept. I wondered how that bastard was running wild in the tower when the walls hadn't been broken yet, but it turns out there was a price to pay. One day. That was the information Odin brought back after fighting the foolish chaos. It's meaningless information now that the walls have been broken, though. Once the clockwork is complete, this will be a huge source of information. Kronos responded to Odin's words. Perhaps the foolish chaos thought he couldn't turn back time and so opened his mouth. Otherwise, there was no way that bastard would have leaked such important information. However, that information gave hope to Yuan and his companions, who were researching the clockwork. We have to make that bastard use his points. Do you have any ideas for how to do that? We just have to make him use his power. His power? How? We just have to keep fighting him. Sun Ogong said confidently. Fighting was his specialty. His immortal power allowed him to fight forever, and Odin's information set Sun Ogong's heart ablaze. However, Kronos' question of, how, wasn't that simple. That bastard won't fight us that easily. He's not the kind of guy who's easy to find, and if he has something called points, he won't even try to fight us directly. Up until now, the foolish chaos had rarely moved directly. He mostly made things happen by slyly manipulating things from behind the scenes. Like the Gigantomachia, Ragnarok, and the Great War of the Heavenly Demons. And there was only one reason why he had resorted to such roundabout methods. It was because he wasn't free from something called points. There was nothing as wasteful as using his power directly. And that's why, but we have to do it anyway. Yuan had always envisioned a situation like this. Waruk, purple flames erupted from the tip of the sword. The outer covering the sky flinched for a moment at the sight of the holy fire. As expected, those bastards were afraid of this fire. If this works, Wan Jiamjung controls holy fire. Waruric, the holy fire reflected in Wan Jiamjung's eyes moved along the tip of the sword. The flames that clung to the sword created a long line in Yuan's vision. Kwang, flames embroidered the sky along the tip of the sword. And where it passed, Waik, a huge flame engulfed the outer. Waruric, flames covered the sky. Of the many attributes Yuan possessed, holy fire was the most effective against the outer. The outer caught in the flames melted on the spot with unknown screams. However, that alone wasn't enough for some of them. Juk, a huge eye appeared nearby. At that moment, their eyes met. Wan Jiamjung resists from. Resistance is partially successful. Partially successful, that meant that some of it had failed. For a moment, Yuan felt his insides being hollowed out and his mind growing faint. Those eyes were dangerous after all. Twilight of coziness. One of the outer gods with a name. Most of them were just trash, but there were a few well-known ones among the outer gods that foolish chaos had summoned. Beings that could kill ordinary people just by making eye contact. There was no way to fight them head-on other than with strong willpower. I can't avoid it. Most people would look away when they saw it. It was natural, just making eye contact with it created an overwhelming sense of fear. That was the same for rankers and high rankers, whether they were Nandas or Gindas. But, that was something he absolutely could not do. Clank, Yuan stared straight at the twilight of coziness. The moment he looked away from it, the fear would become a bigger monster and devour him. Not avoiding it and staring at it. And overcoming that fear. That was the only way to capture the twilight of coziness. Creak, clank, a strange sound rang out every time the giant eye blinked. The twilight of coziness was bewildered. It couldn't understand why Yuan wasn't avoiding its eyes, so it couldn't decide what to do next. And in that gap, swish, 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 Yuan's other hand. A black spear gripped in that hand flew towards it. And, gulp, a long, black line pierced through the body of the twilight of coziness. A small hole appeared in the middle of the giant eye. But only for a moment, as the twilight of coziness squirmed and then fell powerlessly to the ground. The next moment, plop, the hole in the middle of the twilight of coziness's eye opened wide, and colorless blood spurted up. The spear that had left Yuan's hand made a thunderous noise, but it wasn't thunder. Near, is not fully activated. Retrieval is delayed due to incomplete activation. Twilight of coziness, has been eliminated. Near. An item that rivaled the power of Odin's Gingnir. He had thrown it in a hurry, so its power was somewhat weak, but it was enough. There was a penalty for delayed retrieval because it wasn't fully activated, but right now, it was more important to deal with the twilight of coziness first. It possessed the power to devour the minds of its opponents rather than direct combat abilities. In terms of rank or positions, it would be something like a supporter. Getting rid of such beings first was the basics of the basics. Of course, Screech. In return, Yuan had to be surrounded by other outer gods that he hadn't been paying attention to. Screech. He swung his sword and cut off the tentacles of the outer gods. They were not so much living individual beings as they were a mass of long tentacles that were organically connected. In front and behind, and above and below ground. There were too many directions to be careful of. No. Danpeng. There was no need to be careful. Bob Gap, begin. Crunch. The predator bares its teeth. Yuan felt the magic power in his body drain away. And the same went for Danpeng. Crunch. Countless teeth and mouths appeared around Yuan. The predator, the natural enemy of the outer, it had appeared to devour them. Chomp. Snap, snap. The predator began to bite the tentacles that had surrounded them like a beast that had been starving for a long time. The wriggling tentacles quickly lost their strength and drooped. Then, growth rate has increased by 0.002%. Growth rate has increased by 0.004%. Growth rate has increased by 0.001%. Growth rate. Danpeng's level has increased. Danpeng's divine power increases slightly. Magic power increases slightly. Countless messages popped into Yuan's head. There was no increase in his stats at the moment. However, he could feel the magic power he had used to summon the predator slowly returning as the predator ate the tentacles. Yuan smiled as he watched the predator rampage. This was it. The first picture he had thought of. Eat everything. The growth rate of Danpeng that continued to rise and the magic power that increased slightly. The more points the foolish chaos used, the more Yuan gained. A cozy dusk has come. The dusk that had been pierced by the window and crashed to the ground. He was never meant to be defeated by the likes of Kim Yuan. Those who faced the cozy dusk, even if they were high-ranking high-rankers, would stiffen up. However, Yuan only hesitated for a moment before piercing the cozy dusk with a window without much difficulty. What made it possible was his strong mental strength and his fraudulent items that were comparable to Gingner. Furthermore, chomp, sharp teeth snapped off the tentacles. Looking at the teeth that were chewing and swallowing it, the foolish chaos realized that something was wrong. What the hell are those? Giant monsters that were eating the outer. No, to be exact, they were the teeth of some giant monster. It felt familiar. It was terrifyingly fearful, but at the same time, it was awe-inspiring. The thought of daring to challenge that being didn't easily come to mind. It was truly a natural enemy. It was unbelievable, but it was definitely a move that threatened them. Is this why that bastard kept getting in my way? From long ago, the foolish chaos had considered Yuan dangerous. That was why he had incited Hera to eliminate Yuan when he first learned of him. The guy named Kim Yuan. Yes, please do it. It's not that difficult, but why? That guy is just a fledgling who has barely passed the 10th floor. At that time, Yuan had just begun to make a name for himself in the tower after passing the Cheonma Shinkyo test. From the tutorial to the Cheonma Shinkyo test. It was certainly outstanding, but Hera found it strange that the foolish chaos cared about Yuan. Okay, then I'll have Hypnos catch him. Hypnos. He was the 11th floor test supervisor, an Olympus ranker who took orders from Hera. No matter how severe the penalty, Hypnos was a proven veteran to the point of being a test supervisor for a floor. Hera did not doubt for a moment that he would eliminate Yuan. However, I should have handled it more definitively then. The foolish chaos was just as confident. But the result was a failure. He had thought nothing of the incident that had barely happened, but he had never imagined that it would grow to this extent. Looks like the expenses are going to be higher than expected. The foolish chaos raised his head and looked up at the sky that was not yet closed. Above the sky, which had turned purple, the beings outside the tower were entering through the tiny gap that had opened. It was just a tiny gap, but at this very moment, countless members of the foolish chaos's race were reaching out to him. Please, let me in. But, I can't let them all in. The points were not infinite. Although it may seem like a lot thanks to having been accumulated for a long time, there was a set place to use this. So I had to be careful. No matter how much of a threat Kim Yuan became, I couldn't let all the work I've done so far go to waste just to catch that one guy. You're calling all sorts of bastards. The foolish chaos turned his head at the voice that came from behind him. With Kusangi hanging diagonally over his shoulder, Susanoo was standing behind him. You're being quite kind, more than I thought. I can tell you're not going to surprise attack us. What, when I already know everything anyway? And that's not fun. Hey, are you listening right now? The foolish chaos stared at Yuan without saying a word. Yuan wrapped his sword in holy fire and fought the outer, subduing the predators. And the foolish chaos discovered a small child, pretending to fight on Yuan's shoulder, his tiny fist thrust forward with force. I'm sorry, but no way, it can't be. No, it shouldn't be. At the thought of someone who came to mind, the foolish chaos started to move again after having stopped. Now is not the time to take care of your own fun. Chapter 353. Growth rate has increased by 0.01%. It seemed like this time it was a fairly large one. The growth rate increased quite a bit when the predator ate one of the outer gods. The numerical value was so small that I still couldn't tell how much it had increased. I was curious and wanted to check it, but now wasn't the time. Phew, I was starting to get short of breath. It meant that I had been moving without much rest. Moreover, I didn't have the time to save my magic power. Woof. Dan Maple was also getting tired. It required both my magic power and Dan Maple's divine power to summon the predator. Since we had been maintaining the predator against this number of outer gods, it was inevitable that we would get tired quickly. I slightly frowned at the sweat running down my forehead. And at that moment, coo goo goo, I felt an overwhelming presence behind my back that was completely different from before. A hand reaching out over my shoulder. At the same time, a pure white light flashed behind me. Yada's mirror. Screech. Zizing. Susanoo, who had moved through the mirror, blocked the foolish chaos's hand. Not even a small wound appeared on the tip of the hand that had collided with the kusanagi. It would be disappointing if you ran away. Please step back. That's a disappointing thing to say. Clang. The red jewel on the hilt of the kusanagi shook. The heaven of the Yasukani no Magatama unfolds. The Yasukani no Magatama restricts the target's movement. I have no intention of doing that. An energy flowed out of the Yasukani no Magatama and bound the foolish chaos's movements. Susanoo, armed with the 3 artifact. His abilities had grown even higher than when he had met the foolish chaos over 1,000 years ago. Although he didn't have an army of tens of thousands of undead, his abilities as a swordsman had been upgraded several levels thanks to the item known as the 3 artifact. However, the target is resisting the Yasukani no Magatama. Resistance successful, quote. Susanoo's eyes widened at the message that appeared in his head. Successful resistance. Even Heracles hadn't been able to completely resist the power of the 3 artifact, yet the foolish chaos had completely resisted it. If you won't step back. A purple light flashed from within the robe of the foolish chaos. It was a completely different feeling from before. Immediately afterwards, the palm of the foolish chaos stretched out in front of Susanoo's eyes. Susanoo instinctively swung his sword and raised his magical power. He had a hunch that if he didn't respond here, it wouldn't end with just being blown away like before. Waak. As the kusanagi was swung, red lines spread out like a net. Thousands, tens of thousands of sword strikes instantly attacked the foolish chaos and tore him to shreds. One of Susanoo's representative skills during his lifetime. Stormclaw was it. Kwang. The Stormclaw's sword strike lost its power and scattered on the palm of the foolish chaos. Susanoo, whose posture had wavered from using a large skill, failed to respond to the other hand in time. Let me make you kneel. Boong. K. The hand that had grabbed Susanoo's head slammed his head into the ground. For a moment, Yuan frowned at the fight between Susanoo and the foolish chaos unfolding before his eyes. He's more active than I thought. When did that guy ever fight with so much emotion? Yuan had fought the foolish chaos countless times. But except for one time, he had never expressed his emotions or anything in a fight. Then why on earth? The predator bares its teeth. The predator is furious. The predator. Crack, creak, predators emerged around Yuan and the foolish chaos. Yuan's eyes sparkled at the emotions of the predator, which was connected to Dan. Could it be because of this? The predator was not interested in anything other than eating. But that guy, who used to be like that, started to show anger as soon as he was in front of the foolish chaos. Bastard, bastard, and the same goes for Dan. For some reason, Dan started to get annoyed at the foolish chaos. She didn't recklessly jump off his shoulder because she was scared, though. Dan shows unknown hostility towards foolish chaos. I don't know the reason. Wu Wen looked at the foolish confusion that was holding Susanoo down with one arm. It's not that guy, inside the robe that covered his face. Violet eyes gleamed. Below, Susanoo was struggling to get away from the foolish confusion. No matter how foolish the confusion was, it couldn't ignore Susanoo's black sword, so it couldn't approach easily. Let him go, the foolish confusion said, pointing to Dan-ah. Woof. Dan-ah's answer was a refusal. Of course. It was the first time Dan-ah had shown hostility like this. And Woo-won's answer was the same as Dan-ah's. No way. I knew you'd say that. Creak. The crack in the sky grew bigger. The violet sky darkened. The number of outsiders had increased while they were reducing the number. Unlike before, they didn't seem to be thinking about points. Woo-won felt a strange sense of dissonance from the foolish confusion in front of him. Did I provoke it too much? Or, glance. Woof. Dan-ah was still standing tall on his shoulder. The foolish confusion's reaction had definitely changed since he had found the guy. Should I like this or not? Based on this reaction alone, it was highly likely that Dan-ah was the outer's natural enemy. But thanks to that, he had provoked the foolish confusion more than he had expected. Come here, crunch, it's coming, let him go. Roar, the foolish confusion's palm grew so large that it covered Woo-won's entire body in an instant. The moment the palm, divided into dozens of fingers, fell, Woo-won's pupils shone. Fire-eyed golden deity, lights the way. Sensory field, is activated. Snap, there was a tiny gap between the fingers. Woo-won, who had slipped through the gap, quickly twisted his body in the air. The two skills were activated, and Woo-won's senses went haywire. But even so, Woo-won couldn't tell how the foolish confusion would move next. That's why, I can't rely on skills alone. What he needed now was experience. Stab, numerous tentacles of the giant beast stretched out to target Woo-won. Fortunately, Woo-won didn't have to pay attention to the small ones. Predator, shows its teeth. Crack, numerous teeth flew out and bit the tentacles that were targeting Woo-won. In a fight with Outer, there was nothing as reliable as Predator. The guy wasn't fighting with just his appetite, unlike before. Swish, swish, swish. A purple smoke spread out in the air. It was the same smoke he had seen during the fight with Hades. That's dangerous. It wasn't just the foolish chaos who could handle that energy. Most of the famous outer gods could handle that energy. And the moment they came into contact with it, their consciousness and soul would shake precariously and eventually disappear. Whoosh, sacred fire, resists. Woo-won immediately unfolded his sacred fire. Just like when he faced Hades. The fierce flames and the purple smoke collided and shattered. Originally, it was a force that should have been pushed back. The foolish chaos also thought that it would happen. But, whoosh, whoosh, Woo-won's flames were blocking the smoke that even Hades had difficulty blocking so easily. Is it because of that flame? It wasn't just the teeth that appeared everywhere that were devouring Outer. The purple flames spewing out of Woo-won. It was growing larger by using other outers as firewood. Sacred fire. The fire Woo-won was handling smelled familiar. It was dangerous, after all. The guy had several means to deal with them. The risk level, which he thought would be slightly higher than Hades, had now completely changed. Zhiqian de Seong, or Odin of Asgard. No, maybe even more than that. Slash. The body of the foolish chaos was split in half. Soon, the figure of the foolish chaos, which had been blurred like a mirage in the desert, returned to its original state. As if nothing had happened, he turned his head and looked back. The owner of the red sword that had cut his body. It's good to be an undead at times like this. The sword danced. Red lines gathered and gathered, rising from under the feet of the foolish chaos like a tower. Another skill representing Susanoo, Storm Fortress. Thud, the foolish chaos swung its arm and scattered the sword grid. It looked fine as before, but the robe it was wearing was cut in several places. Thud, thud, Susanoo suddenly recovered and appeared in front of the foolish chaos. Even if you die, you will come back to life as many times as you have magic power. Susanoo, who would be resurrected even if he died. It was like a nightmare. The demon swordsman who was not afraid of death had become a body that would not really die. However, unlike what it seemed, the undead were not truly invincible. Rather, it was closer to a weakness. After all, the undead will eventually disappear when the summoner's power runs out. The foolish chaos turned its head as if it was funny. Not only were there drops of sweat on Woo-won's forehead, but his face was gradually turning white. It meant that not only was there a physical problem, but his magic power was gradually running out. Tisk, you're pushing yourself too hard. It was obvious. Woo-won was pouring out his strength like never before since he saw Susanoo. Even in the fight with Hercules, Woo-won didn't use Predator. No matter how natural the enemy was, the number of foreign gods rushing towards Yuan was too great. In the end, I will win this fight. It's a fight that has to be won. You still don't know that guy well. As an undead, he had seen Yuan from the closest place. That's why Susanoo could be sure. Do you think that guy will start a losing fight? No matter how disadvantageous the fight may seem. Yuan never fought a fight that he would lose. No. In the first place, he didn't create such a fight. The foolish chaos felt a strange ominousness again. Susanoo didn't seem like he was lying or bluffing in a situation like this. Then surely, KWA rung. The sound of thunder was heard from somewhere. The head of the foolish chaos went up. In the sky that had turned purple, bright yellow lightning bolts were falling. He's here, and the next moment, flash, a dazzling yellow light swept past the foreign gods who were running towards Yuan. God, KWA rung. Chapter 354. Thunder struck down. All sounds disappeared, and a storm blew. It was a bigger thunderbolt than had been dropped on Camelot. The force that could obliterate a city turned the outsiders to blackish. The world that had changed to violet changed to yellow for a moment. Seeing the tentacles disappear before his eyes, Yuan exhaled deeply. Furiously, tisk, tisk, as if the sky were his territory, Zeus, covered in golden lightning, walked slowly. His appearance caused the outsiders, who were having a field day, to temporarily stop moving. At the same time, the foolish chaos, who was looking at him, took a step back. I guess something's wrong. At Susanoo's muttering, the foolish chaos's gaze turned back to him. Red petals were blooming at the tip of Susanoo's sword. Countless sword strikes gathered together to form a rose garden. Storm in full bloom. Wah-ak! An innumerable number of blades slashed at the foolish chaos's body. At first, even the foolish chaos, who had tried to repel them lightly, did not find it so easy this time. Quote exclamation mark quote. How dare you turn a blind eye to anyone? Swaa! The ground split into tens of thousands of pieces, and the wind and petals cut everything that passed by. In the middle of the red swords, the foolish chaos's body was torn to pieces. Clack! Susanoo, who had swung his sword, put Kusanagi diagonally on his shoulder. He no longer had the strength to wield his sword. The magic power supplied by Yuan was cut off, and now he was struggling to maintain his existence. You're not going to die like this, are you? Tisk, tisk, tisk. The foolish chaos's form was seen returning to its original state. I don't know if he didn't die from the beginning, or if he was resurrected after being killed. Either way, it was a moment when it became clear that he could not kill him with his abilities. I wish I had more magic power. No matter how many of the three divine artifacts, including Kusanagi, were in his hands, Susanoo's power was bound to be limited as long as he shared the magic power of one person. Storm in full bloom was Susanoo's skill that consumed the most magic power among his techniques. But with such a skill, he could only inflict this much damage. Well, from now on. Slide. Susanoo's body became a shadow and seeped into the ground. That monster will take care of it. Monster. The high ranker who was looking down at this place like a god in the sky. It meant Zeus, the god of the heavens. Quarring. Zeus held another thunderbolt in his hand. Zeus's gaze, looking down, met the foolish chaos again. Perhaps because he had taken Susanoo's skill, storm in full bloom, head-on, he still had not fully recovered his body. Dangerous. Tingle, tingle. At the sight of Zeus holding a thunderbolt in his hand, the foolish chaos felt the greatest threat since entering this tower. Their eyes met. Zeus's lips were seen rising. Moment. A thunderbolt fell on the foolish chaos's body. Quarring. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Above the head of the foolish chaos, who stretched out his hand, a mass of giant tentacles appeared as a meat shield. The outsiders, who had been blackened by the thunderbolt that fell below. As if that much meat shield was nothing, the tip of the thunderbolt that Zeus had thrown pierced the foolish chaos's body again. Ku rung. The thunderbolt that pierced the foolish chaos broke the corner of the mountain range and fell to the ground. Zeus, who was looking down at the foolish chaos, who had fallen below the ground, stepped on the void and came down. Now I feel a little better. Now, I feel much better. The foolish chaos was aiming for Dan-ah. After the battlefield was silenced by Zeus' second lightning attack, Yuan was surprised by Zeus' power. However, Zeus knew that the foolish chaos was aiming for his daughter, Dan-ah, and threw a thunderbolt at him. As the foolish chaos summoned a whale-like monster from the crack in the sky, Zeus began to use his most powerful skill, Heavenly Punishment, to respond. With just 2 shots of lightning, Zeus silenced the noisy battlefield. He soon clicked his tongue as he looked at Yuan, who was exhausted from fighting with the foreign gods. What the hell is that? To such guys. There are too many of them. Number. Cheeky. Quirang. Zeus reached out to the subtle movement of a foreign god he felt next to him. A wave of golden lightning swept through the mountains again. Zeus, who instantly turned a group of foreign gods into black ash, laughed and asked. What's wrong with that? ... It had been a long time since he had nothing to say like this. Zeus would have said so. Zeus was better than anyone else in this tower, especially in one-on-many battles. And then, he's a complete monster. Chi. As if he couldn't control his strength, golden lightning leaked out of Zeus' body. What would happen when that power was released to the fullest? Usually, they would be intoxicated with power. But Zeus was different. As if the power had been mine for a long time. His eyes didn't seem much different from before. Furthermore, what do you think we should do from now on? Fortunately, Zeus didn't just run around with his strength. Yuan was the one who planned the battle with the foolish chaos as a final counterattack and brought Zeus in as a last resort. If so, the picture until the next must have been drawn. Zeus admitted that Yuan was better than him in areas other than strength. It was fortunate for Yuan. If he had gone crazy with his newfound strength, he wouldn't have been able to see the next. Let's buy some time for now. Buy time, what do you mean? For now, Yuan's gaze turned to the dust cloud rising from the collapsed mountains. The problem is whether that guy will fight more. The foolish chaos that was hit by lightning and flew away. Yuan didn't think he was dead. No matter how much Zeus was, he wouldn't be able to kill him. Even his colleagues, including Yuan, took too long to catch him. It would be impossible for Zeus, who had just become a qualified rookie god, to defeat him. Whoa! In an instant, a cloud of dust rose into the sky. The crack that was pouring out the foreign gods did not close. Rather, it grew larger and began to intervene more in the tower. It doesn't seem like you're going to stop. Fortunately, Zeus, who muttered so, smiled faintly. It seems that he really likes this situation. Come on. For Zeus, it was a situation he had been waiting for. He had been waiting to give the foolish chaos a shot ever since he was imprisoned in Asgard's prison. And now, then that's it. That time has come. Do whatever you want from now on. Pajijijijik. As soon as Yuan finished speaking, a huge lightning bolt erupted from Zeus' body. It wasn't a special skill or an attack, but it was an electric shock that even Yuan, who was nearby, could feel hot. Of course, Juk, as if responding to Zeus' power, the crack in the sky connected to the outside grew larger. He's more aggressive than I thought. Yuan thought that the foolish chaos wouldn't stop here. He had already lost a lot. The plan to restart Gigantomachia failed, and he lost his last card, Hera, who remained in Olympus. In addition, I used a considerable amount of points in my fight with Yuan. For him, any further fighting would be a burden. Surely, it would have been. But, Yuan looked at Dan, who was growling over his shoulder. He soon realized why the foolish chaos was doing this. It must be because of this guy. The chaos of insanity was aiming for Dan. For some reason, it didn't matter to Yuan. Instead, the more he tried to fight, the better it was for Yuan. Yes, I'll do as you say. Zeus looked up at the sky where the cracks were getting bigger and ignited his lightning. Instead, crackle, the lightning began to form again in Zeus' hand. I have to get at least one shot at that guy. Thud. Zeus started walking toward the outer gods again. Only when Zeus' back disappeared into the distance did Yuan let out a tired breath. The fight he had been fighting alone had come to an end. Phew, still, I can take a break. Yuan looked forward to Zeus' figure slowly disappearing into the distance. Before the regression, he had failed to break through the ceiling he had so desperately longed for and failed to achieve divinity. That was why even Yuan didn't know much about Zeus, who had achieved divinity. But among the numerous rankers, he might have been the one who had prepared for this moment the longest. The king of Olympus, victor of the Gigantomachy, the lord of the sky, and the heavenly god, he had written countless myths and prepared to become a god. Let's watch. Yuan sat on a rock nearby, crossed his arms, and prepared to watch. He wished he had some popcorn. Zeus looked up at the sky. Purple waves covered the sky, and along with the tentacles, strange energies flowed in through the cracks. Roar. Zeus' eyes, looking at the waves, were a mixture of gold and purple. As the size of the waves grew larger, his shoulders felt heavy. It wasn't simply a matter of strength and weakness, but a matter of understanding. I knew there were all sorts of guys in this tower, but Crackle. The lightning in his hand crackled. I didn't think there would be an outside, other than above. Intense hostility and repulsion, Zeus realized instinctively. Just as oil and water could not mix, they were beings who could never coexist with them. In a word, this was an invasion. And now, this is interesting. Rumble, rumble, Zeus was facing that invasion. Boom. The lightning that left Zeus' hand shot up from below. Golden lightning bolts covered the sky. In an instant, it swallowed the cracks that the chaos of insanity had split open. But at that moment, Roar, the owner of the cries that had been heard from the cracks, appeared. Crash. A giant whale opened its mouth. The lightning went into its mouth and made thunderous noises several times. But that was it. Rumble. The thunder soon stopped. Zeus looked at the guy who had shown up from the cracks. What a big fish. A whale, or a shark. It was a monster that seemed to be a mix of all kinds of fish. What was more peculiar was that it had no eyes or nose and only a giant mouth. The cracks, which had only spat out small fry, had started to let in some really big ones. And in response to their appearance, crackle, crackle, rumble, rumble, the lightning bolts that had fallen from the sky began to gather around Zeus. Whoosh. Zeus' gaze turned to Yuan, who had calmly sat down in the middle of this chaotic battlefield and started watching the fight. How arrogant, as if he had finished everything he had to do and was leaving everything to him. Is it my turn now? But Zeus didn't find Yuan laughable. He was the only being in this tower that he acknowledged. And it was also true that he had created this game board all by himself. Watch closely from over there. Clang, clang, hundreds, thousands of lightning bolts rose around Zeus. As long as I'm here, I'm telling you that we will never lose. The most powerful skill Zeus possessed. Heaven's punishment had begun. Chapter 355. The gluttonous devourer. That guy showed up, too. Yuan looked at the massive otherworlder that covered the sky. The one who had consumed Zeus's lightning. The one known as the gluttonous devourer had eaten hundreds of rankers in Yuan's previous life, long ago. It wasn't the only one. There were many other named otherworlders. The arrogant arrogance, the suffering that crawls in the swamp, the chaotic depression. There are more named ones than I thought. It seemed like the foolish chaos was serious this time. There was a limit to how much power it could use directly, so it must have created a rift to bring in other otherworlders, but who would have thought it would bring in so many? Of course, Zeus's response was just as overwhelming. I told you to buy me some time. Who are you? Yuan thought as he watched the scene unfolding before him. It doesn't seem to have any intention of doing that at all. Divine punishment, the strongest lightning skill, a symbol of Zeus. Using it meant that he had no intention of controlling his strength or stamina. Or, quarring, divine punishment signaling the start. He's that confident, he had decided to just sit back and watch for now. In order to recover his depleted stamina and magic power even a little, he needed to rest now. Bah, as if it was dissatisfied. Dana grabbed Yuan's cheek. She was urging him to go out and fight quickly. Yuan glanced at Dana, who was rushing him, and opened his mouth. Stop it, BWA. Let me rest for a bit. He didn't care about other times, but right now, he wanted to rest as much as he could. Quarring, a golden shower was unfolding before his eyes. Yuan's eyes widened as if he didn't want to miss the sight. I don't think I need to move for now. KWA woo. A shower of lightning swept over the otherworlders. A rain of lightning bolts that poured towards the rift. It was aimed at the giant mouth that had appeared earlier. KWA woo woo, quarring. The gluttonous devourer was swept away by the storm of lightning. At first, it opened its mouth as if to devour even that storm, but in the end, it was consumed by its own appetite. Jjoyoyeo, Dzing. Its entire body was torn apart by the storm of lightning, and its body, caught in the storm, burned black. It was impossible to even recognize its form anymore. And the ones caught in the storm weren't just the gluttonous devourer. Chi-ee, Piosuk. Quarring, Ku-gu-gu-gong. Divine punishment swept through everything in Zeus's sight. It burned and destroyed everything in the world like a natural disaster. No, to be exact, it was everything under the purple sky. Chi-ji, Chi-ji-ji-ji. Zeus's golden eyes sparkled as he looked at the otherworlders who had turned to black ash. There were a few that survived and were still wriggling. However, there were a few survivors struggling to stay alive. That fact alone was enough for Dana to spend time and effort on them. The first target, the hungry glutton, had completely disappeared without a trace, but there were a few other beings mixed in with the black ash. Dizzying pride, pain crawling in the swamp. They were all outer gods with names to some extent. Zeus reached out to the surviving outer gods. At the same time, lightning shot out of his hand. Kwa Wang. With that, Zeus cut off the breath of the remaining outer gods. It had only been a few minutes. The time it took to clean up the outer gods that filled the sky. Dana looked up at Zeus, who had a few beads of sweat on his forehead. Strangely enough, the wrath of heaven did not affect the place where Dana was sitting. Was it because he watched the fight with his arms crossed, unlike usual? Dana had unknowingly become the all-knowing administrator of the ranking system. Rank 3 No. 2. Zeus's power, which he had seen through the wrath of heaven, was among the best of the high rankers Dana had ever seen. And that was true not only for the high rankers of the present era, but also for the future. The king of Asgard and the high ranker Odin, ranked second. Perhaps Zeus's current strength could be comparable to his. He's become a real monster. Thud. Dana's gaze turned to the foolish chaos walking across the ashen land. It was a rather desperate step. Dana, who had been sitting and resting for a while, got up from his seat again. He intends to go all the way. If he had intended to run away after seeing Zeus's power, he would have done so already. Nevertheless, the foolish chaos had dared to show himself before them again. That meant that he had no intention of backing down here. Haaat. Swoosh. The foolish chaos's arm went up. At the same time, outer gods began to pour out of the cracks again. Jjoorrrrrrrrrr. Gurgle, gurgle. The purple sky, which had faded for a while, darkened again. Zeus's brow furrowed as he used the wrath of heaven once more to sweep the world. He's persistent. I clearly told you to just stall for time. Zeus turned his head at the voice coming from beside him. Dana, who had jumped up with Hermes' help, approached Zeus. His face looked better than before, perhaps because he had rested for a bit. Of course, Zeus was not particularly happy with Dana's help. You can keep resting. From his point of view, Dana, who had not fully recovered his stamina, was not of much help. Don't worry, I'll take care of my own body. I'm not fighting to help you anyway. Dana wasn't fighting just to win. This fight was the first battle against the outer gods. And these beings outside the tower were the driving force behind filling Dana's stomach and making him grow. And now, the foolish chaos was targeting Dana. That fact alone was enough for Dano to spend his time and effort on the maple tree. There's no better chance than this. Snap, crack. Predators opened their mouths everywhere. Predator devours the remains of ravenous appetite. Predator devours the remains of pain that crawls in the swamp. Predator devours the remains of confusion that falls into depression. Growth rate increased by 1.02%. Growth rate increased by 0.89%. Growth rate. The remains were already dead, and it was difficult to even find their corpses. Perhaps because of that, even the corpses of the fairly famous guys didn't raise the growth rate that much. But maybe it was because there was still a lot of quantity. As the predators devoured all the corpses of the outer gods, the growth rate rose by more than 7%, and the magic power that had been lacking also felt like it was rising quite a bit. Magic power has increased by 1. The additional increase in stats that had exceeded 3 digits was quite significant. Especially in a combat situation like now, a 1 stat increase restored nearly half of the magic power that had bottomed out. And that was exactly why Dano started moving again. This is enough. Magic power surged again. Whoosh. At the same time, the power of Wan Ahmgyeomjung was imbued in Dano's eyes again. Immediately after that, the eyes of the foolish chaos and Dano met. Take it back again. The foolish chaos gave an order to the newly deployed outer gods. Rumble, rumble. Another bundle of lightning bolts was created around Zeus. Like that, the clash began again. Heart of Oranos creates lightning. Crackle. A spear was clenched in his hand. It was a fairly large and magnificent spear, considering it had been created in an instant. Although it might be shabby compared to the one Zeus had in front of him. Rumble. Dano's spear possessed 2 attributes. Bang. The lightning clenched in his hand exploded and flew away. The spear, which flew while sweeping away the tentacles, created a hole in the clouds. You're finally making it usable. Zeus. Evaluation of Dano's lightning. He was the one who had been displeased with Dano's lightning ever since the fight began. It was the first time he had ever praised him. It meant that Dano's proficiency in creating lightning had increased that much. But even with the help of that item, you're still lacking if that's all you can do. Then, swish, a black spear was held in Dano's hand. How about this? Bzzz. The spear that flew from his fingertips grazed Zeus' head and passed by. The next moment, thud, Near, which had been thrown, was embedded in the shoulder of the foolish Chaos, who was reaching behind Zeus' back. Near has not been fully activated. The incomplete activation will delay the retrieval. Near, which had been retrieved just a few minutes ago. Dano threw it without hesitation. It was greedy to expect a proper activation on a battlefield like this. The foolish Chaos, who had been hit by Near, staggered for a moment before starting to run toward Dano again. No, it tried to run. Kwang. A pillar of lightning blocked his view. Foolish Chaos reached out and forcefully opened a path. Have you grown fond of it? It's still a fledgling. Zeus glanced at Wuyan, who had left Foolish Chaos to him and started fighting the other outer gods. I plan on raising it a little more. Zeus didn't think highly of Wuyan right now. There were plenty of high rankers stronger than Wuyan in the tower right now. His own son, Heracles, for example, and all the high rankers within the top 10, such as Sun Ogong and Odin, were much stronger than Wuyan. But what about in 5 years, or 10 years? Even Zeus couldn't easily guess how much Wuyan would grow. If you don't dodge, wah! A purple haze surged from Foolish Chaos's hand. I'll make you dodge, even if I have to force you. If you can, Kwang. Zeus and Foolish Chaos clashed. Despite being repeatedly struck by lightning, knocked down, and seemingly destroyed, Foolish Chaos didn't die. Is this an illusion? There had never been an enemy who could revive after being killed multiple times. Even if they had the immortal power of the heavenly great sage, they would still get injured and eventually collapse from exhaustion. He was clearly winning, but the more Zeus fought, the more he felt like he was sinking into a deep swamp. Shuyuyu. At that moment, everything in Zeus's field of vision disappeared, and a blurry figure appeared before him. Black hair and beard, a man who looked just like him. Kron, what was it? He couldn't quite remember the name. Nevertheless, a strange sense of fear crept into his heart. Just then, Lord, Kron, from somewhere far away. Small but thunderous voices rang out. Wah! The man's figure disappeared along with the purple haze that had been obscuring his vision. Then, the faint voices he had heard just now became clearer. Kron, Lord Kron. Wah! They were still quite far away. But numerous presences were rapidly approaching. Zeus's lips curled up slightly. He finally understood why Wuyan had told him to stall for time. So this is what you were waiting for. The followers of the Cheonma divine cult rushing in from afar to help their little cult leader. Over there, I smell blood, something's different. Whatever, it's a fight. The most battle-loving race in the tower, who went crazy at the thought of a fight. The Cheonma divine cult, and the Demon King's Guild. The moment the two guilds arrived to fight the outer gods. Chapter 356. It was when I was carrying out tasks with Hercules. The first person Yuan contacted was the leader of the heavenly demon cult. It was Cheonmujin. You surprised me. Contact me whenever you want. His words were full of meaning. He was reproaching me for not contacting him until now. And he was urging me to contact him often. Yuan apologized first. Although they were only connected through titles, he was still his disciple. Sorry, but whatever. Didn't I tell you? You don't need to feel such a heavy sense of responsibility for that. He said that, but I could feel through his voice and tone that he wanted me to contact him often. Yuan felt that he had been too neglectful and bowed his head briefly at the shameless request that was about to begin. I have a favor to ask. A favor? There was a brief silence. Soon, Cheonmujin noticed Yuan's intentions and asked. A fight. I remembered that he hadn't left Heavenly Mountain in a long time, but it seemed that his instincts were still sharp. Yuan felt Cheonmujin's competitive spirit through the phone. Yes, a very big one. I like getting calls like this. The heavenly demon cult was the one who was thrilled with the fight. They were known to be the most warlike along with the Demon King. Just like Quan Cheonju Pungbeklim, the ranker of the heavenly demon cult that Yuan had just fought. But, this time was different. It's not just going to be a big fight. Maybe the size of the fight didn't matter. What mattered was that the opponent was a different dimension being that he had never encountered before. Yuan briefly explained about the outer gods. What powers they possessed, what kind of beings they were. How dangerous this fight was. Now it was Cheonmujin's turn to decide. Ooh, ha ha ha. For a moment, laughter could be heard through the phone. This was the first time Yuan had seen Cheonmujin react this joyfully. It might have been because he didn't know much about the outer gods yet, but he seemed to be genuinely happy. If that's the case, I welcome it even more. And then, The next person Yuan contacted was Diablo. It might be harder than you think. Welcome. A warm welcome. Kwahahaha. Are you listening, you guys? This guy also brought in quite a number of useful items. Even without that, I was bored since the Qianma competition just ended. Whoever it is, they're going to regret messing with our Ma Wang. Buzzing voices could be heard. It seemed like they were pretty excited about the prospect of a big fight. Yuan was also sure that at the very least, the Ma Wang, if not the Qianma Divine Church, would receive a similar reaction. After all, they were the type of people who would never back down from a fight. The question is whether or not we can get them to show up. The key was how long they could keep the foolish chaos occupied. And how long he would be willing to fight. It probably wouldn't be easy. Considering that the foolish chaos, after seeing Zeus move, probably had less than a 20% chance of continuing to fight. Of course, if we could just get through that probability, it would be a huge win. Kwajik. The demons that had charged at the foreigners swung their claws and weapons. The tentacles were torn and cut off. The demons, or more specifically the devil race, were born with dozens of times more strength than humans. And as if not to be outdone by the demons. Ha-ap. One of the Qianma Divine Church's heavenly lords. Quan Qianju, Peng Bek Rim, thrust his fist forward and emitted blue lightning. Quarring, Quan Qianju was one of the best martial artists in the Murim world. No, if you only looked at the Murim world, he might have even been the best. Despite that, the lightning emitted from his fist was nothing compared to Zeus's. Of course, to Yuan, who was seeing him again after a long time, it didn't seem that way. He's grown a lot. The first time he met Peng Bek Rim was when Yuan reached the 10th floor. The second test of the Qianma Divine Church. Enduring the 3-second strike of Quan Qianju, Peng Bek Rim. At the time, Yuan had exchanged dozens of blows with Peng Bek Rim, and as a seasoned upper-ranked ranker, Peng Bek Rim couldn't help but feel a sense of defeat just by fighting someone like Yuan to a draw. Was it because of the shock from that? He had heard that Peng Bek Rim had gritted his teeth and gone into training since that day. It had only been a few years, so he wondered how much he had grown. I heard that Qianqianju has entered the high rankers. That wasn't all. Qianqianju and Dakanju, who were also Qianju, had also climbed quite high in the rankings. It was partly because the rankers of the Heavenly Demon Cult had risen overall since the Heavenly Demon Cult had come down from the Heavenly Mountain and merged with the Murim. It was also because the Heavenly Demon Cult had become stronger overall. When on earth did you contact them? Zeus couldn't help but wonder about this situation. The Heavenly Demon Cult had even brought the Demon King. These were forces that would never have been easy to gather. It's been a while. I had already contacted them when I told you the location. When was that? That punk wanted to fight in the middle of the city, so I threatened him with the administrator. I contacted them when I changed the location. You mean to say that these guys came all this way just because you contacted them? Yeah, it was such an easy answer that Zeus momentarily wondered if Yuan was trying to dodge the question. He gave him a doubtful look. However, Yuan's answer was the truth. Sub-leader of the Heavenly Demon Cult. 12th Demon King. The two titles that Yuan held. Each of these titles represented the second in command of each guild. Yuan had power. The power to move the Heavenly Demon Cult and the Demon King. And Yuan had a cause. He had an enemy that he had been fighting for a long time as the second in command of the guild. To defeat that enemy, he needed the strength of the guild. With both cause and power, it wasn't difficult for Yuan to move the collective group of a guild. It seems like you've been doing a lot of running around. Yuan shrugged and replied, I worked up a sweat. Now, the battle was entering its second half. Swish. Inside his robe, the foolish chaos saw a dizzying number of players in his vision. Demons. And humans. All of them were beings who had inherited the authority of players. Those who had formed groups under the name of a guild. They appeared before his eyes and began to fight, aiming their spears and swords at the outsiders. This situation is too early. Even now, the points were being consumed rapidly. The more outsiders he summoned, the more he used the power of his main body. The points drained away like water from a hole in a bucket, without end. 1 point used, 7 points used, 4 points used, 3 points, closing square bracket. Messages had been popping up in his head for a while now. Each one was a small number, but the problem was that these points were being used up steadily and quickly. No, the biggest problem was that he didn't know when he would have to use them. I've already used too many points. Points. The power he would need to use to open the door someday. That was why the foolish chaos couldn't use it recklessly. Even if he did use it, he had to get the most efficiency out of the smallest number. That was why this event was a gamble for the foolish chaos. He had already used a considerable number of points killing Hades. He had hoped that Olympus would collapse because of it and that the Gigantomachy, which had failed, would revive. But then, boom, all of that work had been ruined, and on top of that, he had ended up using a much larger number of points here. The eyes in his robes shone fiercely. He would have liked to have ended it all here. If only because it was a waste of the points he had used so far. However, the heavenly demon sect and the demon king, even Zeus, their power is several times stronger than I had originally thought. Even his fight with U1 had been something he had tried to avoid because he didn't want to waste points. He had stubbornly stuck to fighting, and even though he had planned to get rid of the annoying woman while he was at it. Was this what you were aiming for? Craash. He would have liked to pour out all the points he had gathered so far. But in reality, he wasn't even able to relax and use his energy properly. The more he did that, the more points would be used up. He had already used too many points. What if there's a next time, and a time after that? His contemplation didn't last long. No, it couldn't last long. The Demon King and the Heavenly Demon Sect, and the cries of the outer gods clashing with Zeus. The more time passed, the more points he would have to use. The foolish chaos, who had been clenching his fists, dropped his arms. Is this it? He couldn't help but admit it. That this fight was their defeat. Boom. U1 looked towards Diablo, who was throwing punches towards the outer gods in the distance. As if not to be outdone, Cheon Mugen's Cheonma Shinsu moved. Boom. Kwahahaha. With a swing of Cheonma Ryong's sword, the tentacles of the Cheonma divine sect were cut off and fell to the ground with a thud. Cheonma divine sect was relatively weak, but Cheon Mugen's power was not inferior to the Demon King's. Your name is Cheon Mugen. Even in a short period of time, Cheon Mugen was impressive enough to catch the eye of the stern Zeus. Your skills are quite good. Quite good. That alone was a huge compliment from Zeus. It also meant that Cheon Mugen's skills had grown even more, which he had never seen before. Thank you, Kwaat. Cheon Mugen, who swung the sword of Cheonma Ryong, answered Zeus's small murmur. If possible, can I receive some guidance from you later? On this chaotic battlefield, no matter how good a high ranker's hearing was, it meant that he had been aware of his own voice from the beginning. Zeus curled his lips as if it was funny. Cheon Mugen. He was definitely someone he had been interested in for a long time. He already knew from the report that even Athena, known as the best female warrior of Olympus, could not surpass him. You'll have to be prepared. I am always prepared to die. Prepared to die. Zeus thought he should visit Cheon-san once this was over. After overcoming the numerical disadvantage, the battlefield became a little less tense. Zeus found U1 standing in the middle of it, looking around. What are you doing there? Thinking. What? I'm thinking of running away. Zeus, who was about to ask who, soon looked around like U1. The guy was nowhere to be seen. The foolish confusion. The mastermind behind this battlefield had disappeared from his seat. He couldn't be seen no matter how much he searched. It seemed that he had run away during the confusion right after the Demon King and Cheonma divine sect joined forces. Zeus frowned and muttered, "Did I miss him? I should have struck him with lightning." You didn't miss him, Jebek. It was then that Yuan, who had been staring at one place, began to walk. Steps that didn't make sense. Where are you going? Yuan opened his mouth at Zeus's question. To that guy's face. At the same time, KWAGGG. To stick this in. Lightning formed in his hand. Chapter 357. SSSKUK. The color of the sky slowly returned to its original state. Blue light returned between the purple sky. In the dim sky, golden sunset was mixed, and the three colors coexisted. And above the sky where the color changed like that. Zang, the sky, which had been pouring out foreign gods until just now, began to close slowly. The sky, what, is it over now? So easily, you act tough, you tried to die with your legs. What, a human? The believers of the Cheonma Divine Church were delighted that no more enemies appeared. They didn't want to fight anymore. The same was true for the demons on the side of the Demon King. What strange guys. Where did such disgusting guys come from? Does anyone know anything? The blood and energy emitted from the tentacles of the foreign gods were unfamiliar and frightening even to the demons who used magic, not mana. In the case of the lower demons, some of them fainted because they could not overcome the pressure of the battlefield. The existence of the foreign gods was beyond their reason. Cheon Mu Jin swung his sword without rest toward the remaining foreign gods. The Cheon Marayong, moving after him, burned the last moment and emitted a sword attack several times more powerful than before. In the battlefield that was ending like that, Cheon Mu Jin looked at the foreign gods dying in front of him. It's not just a matter of being strong. He recalled the surprise when he first arrived on this battlefield. Beings that he never thought would exist in this world. The moment he faced them, everything he had learned and understood so far was shaken. It was the same when he fought. It felt like he was fighting a huge, one, not an absolute majority of enemies. Cheon Mu Jin cut down the body of the last remaining foreign god and stood there for a moment, looking around. Had Yuan been fighting these guys all along? You must have felt it too, right? Thud. Cheon Mu Jin turned his head at the sign of someone approaching from the side. He thought a giant was approaching, but it wasn't. A demon with a similar height and size to him. He didn't emit any energy in particular, but he smelled like a loser. Although he didn't specifically give off an aura, he reeked of defeat. But at that point, a considerable portion of it had flown away. However, that point had largely evaporated due to this incident. First, what should I do with Kim Yuan? At that moment, as the foolish chaos was reorganizing his thoughts in his head. Flash. The foolish chaos stopped his movement of stepping forward towards the light that had flown from far away. Rumble. A wave of electricity crossed his field of vision. The wave swept over the ground where the foolish chaos had been heading until just now, and completely annihilated the edge of the mountain. To throw electricity that could destroy a city from such a distance. There was only one person in this tower who could do such a thing. You missed. If you had just moved a little to the side, you would have been hit. There's nothing more pathetic than a guy who just talks. Clank. Yuan and Zeus. The two of them had chased after the foolish chaos. Was that Zeus' spear? It was the first time in a long time that he had felt a chill down his spine. If he had been hit head-on by that lightning just now, perhaps even his unstable incarnation body would have been annihilated in an instant. I can tell where you're going. BWA. Dan Ah, who was sitting on Yuan's head, nodded her head. We have a great radar here. As long as he could track the foolish chaos using Dan Ah, Yuan had no intention of letting him go. Moreover, he was determined to save his points. There was no reason to be afraid of the foolish chaos in this situation. Radar. The foolish chaos realized what Yuan meant and looked at Dan Ah, who was proudly crossing her arms. Do you even know what that is? I don't know. You don't know. If you know, tell me. Bah. She must have thought she was the one telling the story. Dan Ah raised her hand and chimed in on Yuan and the foolish chaos conversation. Really, sometimes Yuan wondered if even Dan Ah herself knew what she was. Despite being a great being with a power that was like the natural enemy of the outer, Dan Ah's actions and speech were no different from that of a young child. I need to check too. So what are you checking? I don't know deeply. I can't know even if I try. Swish, swish. Zeus' eyes glinted at the appearance of the predator. After chaos was swallowed by the predator, Yuan watched Zeus, who was showing interest in Dan Ah. Zeus considered Dan Ah, next to Yuan, as an interesting opponent in this fight. Chaos hinted that even if he were to die, there was a possibility that Poseidon would gain his divine status, implying that Zeus would be his opponent. Original text. The foolish chaos reached out his hand. So don't worry about it. That moment, bang, once again, Zeus' thunderbolt swept through the body of the foolish chaos. Devour, devour, a lightning spear that created a deep pit in the ground. Zeus, who had thrown the thunderbolt because he couldn't stand listening to the conversation, opened his mouth. You two talk too much. Yuan waited for a moment and was about to say something, but he stopped. Anyway, it was unlikely that the foolish chaos would obediently answer his questions. If Dan Ah really had a great secret related to the outer, the guy wouldn't just let that information go. Perhaps Zeus had realized that fact and made the first move. If I get greedy here and miss the guy, that would be an even greater loss. Greed is like poison, it can sometimes be a good medicine, but in most cases, it ruins the body. It was the same now. Yuan had already gained a lot from this incident. If he had been more greedy here, he might have missed the biggest thing at the last moment. He could gradually get clues about Dan Ah. Anyway, he would have many more encounters with the outer in the future. Crackle, crackle, the place where the lightning swept past. Yuan looked at the foolish chaos standing there blankly. As expected, the guy didn't collapse with this one blow. Of course, that didn't mean he didn't take any damage. It was the spear of Zeus, who had achieved divine status. The body of the foolish chaos was riddled with holes from the electric shock. He literally looked like he was dying. What the heck is this? Zeus looked dazed, as if he hadn't expected to do this much with one blow. He thought he would have to hit the lightning at least a few more times. Did he give up fighting? The foolish chaos had already chosen to run away. It seemed that he had decided that continuing the fight would do more harm than good. And that meant he had used up a significant amount of points that could have caused a slight delay in the plan. It's good for me, though. Snap. The predator bares its teeth at the foolish chaos. Teeth appeared around the foolish chaos. I wish he would struggle a little more. Predator's appearance brought a strange light to Zeus's eyes. Golden eyes turned towards Dan-ah, who was sitting on Wu Jin's head. Dan-ah wasn't the only one who was foolish enough to be interested in this place. Not one, but two. Someone worth watching. Ba-at. Dan-ah turned her head and met Zeus's eyes. Although she wasn't a player, Zeus had found another interesting opponent in this fight, after Wu Jin. A stronger pawn for a bigger fight. Wu Jin, in his own way, and Zeus, in his own way, began to prepare their next move for the upcoming battle. Thud, sharp teeth approached the foolish chaos. Half melted and burned, the foolish chaos didn't resist Predator's teeth. Any more resistance would be meaningless anyway. It would take time to create another body double, but it would save him a lot more points than starting a fight here again. The foolish chaos raised its head. The sky was now so narrow that even a little mouse would have a hard time getting through. The passage connecting to the outside was almost closed. It was because the power that had been maintaining the passage had disappeared. But I'm lucky. Entering Predator's mouth, the foolish chaos let out a faint laugh inside his robe. Just come on over. Chaos and confusion had to continue without end. And just before the passage closed, the foolish chaos had made another preparation for that. If Zeus gains divinity, with his eyes closed inside his robe, the foolish chaos looked at Zeus. One method that had come to mind ever since Zeus first appeared on the battlefield. There's a high chance that Poseidon will too. Until the next body double was completed and came over. He would take care of it for a while. The foolish chaos shook off the last of his regrets that remained in his current body. Straightening his back and stiffening his neck, the foolish chaos walked into the mouth that was swallowing him whole. And then, the next moment, chomp, Predator swallowed the foolish chaos. Chapter 358. Maples, level has increased. Maples, level has increased. Maples, divine power has increased by 13. The growth rate has increased by 14.22%. Mana has increased by 4. Fragment of chaos has been defeated. 1 million points have been acquired. Messages continued to pop up. As expected, the foolish chaos was qualitatively different from other outers. In an instant, the growth rate increased by over 14%, and the level increased by 6 stages. Yuan's mana was the same. His mana had increased by 4 stages. His mana, which had been close to the bottom, now felt full, and the vessel containing his mana must have gotten much bigger than before. So it's the fragment of chaos. He had expected it, but it was true. The system didn't call it foolish chaos, but fragment of chaos. He was not the real thing, but a kind of clone. If it was the main body, it wouldn't have ended so easily. The foolish chaos still had a hard time entering the tower. If he had tried to enter the tower, a gate several times larger than the sky that had just opened would have had to open. It's too greedy to expect that much. No matter how much the foolish chaos wanted Maple, he wouldn't go that far. Moreover, Yuan didn't want that kind of situation either. If that happens, even Zeus won't be able to stop it. He had confirmed that Zeus was strong. He had thought that Zeus would be much stronger than before, given that he had accumulated a lot of myths, but this was beyond his expectations. But even so, the opponent was the foolish chaos. If the main body had come, this fight would have ended in defeat for both sides. Everything is satisfactory, but only one thing is regrettable. Growth rate, 99.99%. The second thing Yuan wanted to gain from this fight. Maple's growth. It was a growth rate that wasn't much left. That's why he thought he might be able to reach 100% in this fight, and in the end, he succeeded in catching the foolish chaos. However, 0.01%. It was just a tiny bit short. It's not just a coincidence. It was too close to call it a coincidence. Maybe 0.01%. A different opportunity might be needed to fill this small gap. Or catch a much bigger one. The finishing touches were almost done. Yuan leaned against a tree left in the Predator's path. As the tension eased, he felt his strength leaving his body. His tense nerves and tight body relaxed. Is that guy dead? Crunch. Zeus approached Yuan. The foolish chaos, which had been eaten by the predator, had disappeared without a trace. Now that there was no body to be found, Yuan was the only one who could ask about his life or death. Yet, Zeus's eyebrows wiggled. This time, I thought I would definitely dispose of him, but is still alive. Where'd he go? Hesh, not there. Then, up there. Yuan looked up. Zeus, following Yuan's actions, discovered the heavens that had already been completely closed. A crimson color, a sunset sky with not races of violet. Zeus, who looked up at sky same as Yuan, muttered. Outside. At the word, outside, Yuan's eyes widened slightly before returning to normal. Zeus seemed to slightly notice something. A completely different world from this tower. It seemed that Zeus had seen a glimpse of that world because of this incident. Do you intend to keep fighting until you catch that guy? Yuan asked Zeus's intentions. Zeus's goal was to contain their rampant chows, and to a certain extent, he had achieved that goal through this incident. However, this guy, anyway, wasn't real body, but an avatar connected to the tower. Yuan asked how far Zeus would go, and that's a natural question. Zeus answered without hesitation. All this while, he had been looking up at the sky where the door to the outside had opened. Yuan waited for Zeus, who seemed to be lost in thought for a moment. He must have a lot on his mind. Outside of the tower. Outer, otherworldly beings that exist in a world with different laws than theirs. Knowing, understanding, and accepting their existence was not something that could be done in this short amount of time. As he was thinking that, I saw something strange while fighting that guy. Zeus suddenly said something unexpected. His golden eyes gradually deepened like a jewel sinking under the surface of the water. Eyes that showed no sign of what he was thinking. Yuan asked at Zeus's expression, which he had never seen before. Something strange. Someone who looked like me. If he looked like you. He had a similar face to mine and black hair. Same face and black hair. Naturally, Yuan's eyes went to Zeus's face, where the color of his hair and beard had changed. Black-haired Zeus. Yuan's eyes widened. He had a lot more wrinkles. As if he were older than me. Was there a mole on his cheek? I don't remember well. The more Zeus explained, the more Yuan's eyes shook. Wrinkles on the face, a mole on the cheek, and black hair. When he changed Zeus's face like that little by little, it looked exactly like someone else's face. I guess you know who it is. Was he saying that to see Yuan's reaction from the beginning? Zeus stared at Yuan as if he had expected this. Who is it, really? Since it was someone who looked like him, he seemed to be concerned. It was a question that didn't need to be pondered. Cronus. Zeus paused for a moment. An unnatural reaction. If an unknown name had been mentioned by Yuan, he would have questioned it, but he didn't. Instead, he just tilted his head briefly and nodded without answering. It's an unfamiliar name. There were no further questions. I had expected it for a while, but also, it's the same this time. No one in this world remembered Kronos. The fact that his existence had been erased by the clockwork meant that it was a different kind of problem than all of his history disappearing. In this world, no one remembered Kronos and no one tried to remember him. It would have been the same if Kronos had been mentioned by Yuan. People didn't know about Kronos and they weren't curious. That's he was giving up. No, Yuan noticed Zeus's eyes flickering slightly. It's a little different. It was the first time. It was the first time I'd seen anyone react to the name Kronos like this. Zeus met Kronos. Zeus, who was still looking up at the sky. Even now, he seemed to be concerned about Kronos, who had the same face as him. That inspiration, Kronos, the mastermind who created Odin and the clockwork, and sacrificed himself to use it. And yet he, what the hell happened, appeared before Zeus. The moment I thought that such a big event was over, a small sense of unease began to stir in Yuan's chest like a spark. A small spark that could spread into a wildfire. Hades, who had been presumed dead, returned to Olympus. Some of the Olympus players who followed him welcomed him with cheers. The dead king has returned. Our king rules over death. Infinite glory to the king of death. Glory, stop it, it is giving me a headache. Hades, who had just been resurrected, had to cover his throbbing head from the commotion that followed his return. Some rankers doubted Hades' authenticity, but it wasn't difficult to convince them. Hades had a unique skill that only he possessed in the tower, and it was nothing for him to show it. And so, with Hades' return, Olympus gradually settled into stability. And around that time, Asgard had been silent for a long time since the end of Ragnarok. The royal palace of Asgard. A small bedroom located at the top. A man lying on a luxurious golden bed with a duvet made of phoenix feathers woke up from his sleep. Are you awake? Click. Odin, who was sitting next to him and reading a book with small glasses perched on his nose, closed the book and asked. A gaunt body, a face full of wrinkles. The old man, who had been asleep for a long time, opened his mouth as he looked at the sunlight coming into the room. It's been a long time. The moment he looked out the window, he realized how much time had passed. They say that a sleeping eye opens in the blink of an eye, but he had been asleep long enough to feel that long time. 100 years this time as well. Exactly. The curse of knowledge is truly terrible. Being awake is suffering. 100 years. That was how long the old man on the bed, Mimir, had been asleep. He slept for 100 years and was awake for 1 year. And after a year had passed, he would have to fall asleep again. Odin's oldest friend, Mimir, he struggled to get out of bed. Be careful, your body hasn't moved in 100 years, so it will take time to adjust. Why are you here? I was worried about my friend. Worried about what? It wasn't the first or second time this had happened. Mimir muttered those words in a small voice. 100 years was a long time, but for Odin, who had lived for eternity, it wasn't that long. It was something that would continue to happen anyway. Mimir found Odin's behavior, who was waiting for him on time, to be strange. However, it seems the clockwork is complete. Swish. Odin wasn't just there to see his old friend wake up. Odin put the book he had been covering on the bed and got up. He walked to the window and faced the bright sunlight. I need your foresight. Twang. Mimir covered his aching eyes with his hand. His eyes began to manifest power as he regained consciousness. Mimir's eyes possessed mystical power. It was said that the eyes, which could see everything he wanted to see, could even see into the future. The curse of knowledge. It was a side effect caused by what Mimir had seen and learned with those eyes. Instead of gaining those eyes, Mimir had to pay 100 years of his time for every year. Something's wrong. Ask for my help. It's worth it. It seems that more than one person has returned to the clockwork. Odin looked surprised for a moment, then nodded as if that was to be expected. Of course. His opponent was Mimir. Maybe he could see through his thoughts without him saying anything. One must be the great emperor of heaven. And the other one is a guy named Kim Yu-won. I don't know who that is. He hasn't even been in the tower for 100 years. The story about Yu-won didn't get any longer. Time was more precious than gold to Mimir. His day was like 100 days for others. Instead of wasting time on useless talk, Odin quickly got to the main point. Anyway, the fact that 2 people have returned here means that 2 people have been sacrificed. And one of them must have been you. That's right. Then, at that moment, when he was about to ask who the other person was, Cronus, this guy, Mimir, who had been covering his aching eyes with one hand, muttered. What the hell happened? Chapter 359. Yu-won returned to Olympus. He had been traveling with Heracles for a long time to complete the task, so he needed a little rest. In addition, Olympus had invited him. The banquet hall was filled with beautiful melodies. People were dancing, playing musical instruments, and delicious-looking food was served everywhere. And in the meantime, today's protagonist, the rising star of Olympus. A man with a red face, drunk on alcohol. Dionysus, the high ranker of Olympus, pointed his hand at Yu-won and shouted. Kim Yu-won. Wow, Kim Yu-won, Kim Yu-won. The benefactor of Olympus. Kim Yu. Cheers erupted. Yu-won, who was sitting in the middle of the seat, was showered with cheers. Yu-won didn't move a muscle. The cheers should have subsided naturally, but the atmosphere in the banquet hall did not cool down. Now, cheers. Dionysus raised his glass without hesitation. It was a drink made by Dionysus for the rankers. Cheers. Clang. Glasses clashed everywhere. Yu-won bowed his head, sipping a much weaker drink. He was too embarrassed to show his face. I came here for nothing. Dionysus had come to him and asked him to come, saying that he wanted to brighten up the place, so he came along to cool his head. I didn't think it would be a place like this. I shouldn't have come after all. Brother Dionysus is a little bit like that. Please understand. Thud. A large hand came on Yu-won's shoulder. He knew who it was without even having to look at his face. You don't like places like this either. I like to drink quietly by myself. Heracles sat next to Yu-won and reached out. Heracles, who had picked up one of the wine barrels next to the table, began to drink it. It was a drink that even the most experienced rankers would get drunk on if they drank a bottle. Even Dionysus, who had made the drink, was drunk like that, but Heracles. Bang! He almost emptied a barrel of alcohol and looked fine. It tastes good. Rather, he seemed to be lacking, savoring it. Yuan shook his head at the sight of Heracles like that. I was sick for days after drinking with this guy. Heracles was a notorious alcoholic. He wasn't just good at drinking. He drank more than even the giants, considering his large size. Even if the magic power in his body didn't wash away the alcohol, he must have been a born alcoholic. Why are you here? You didn't come here to play. I was invited. Invited. Heracles tilted his head and pointed to Dionysus, who was playing the instrument. By that brother, Dionysus was a high ranker who was known to have sat on the throne of alcohol, even in Olympus. He led the current Olympus banquet and was known to have the ability to bless alcohol and enhance the power of players. He loved alcohol more than anyone else and was happy because of alcohol. Yuan looked at the rankers and players laughing and talking in the banquet hall. Sometimes this isn't bad either. It wasn't a very special banquet. A banquet hosted by Dionysus, held every other day. It wasn't a very enjoyable atmosphere because it was noisy, but it wasn't bad to think about it again. Then, creak, the noisy hall became quiet as footsteps entered the banquet hall. Heavy footsteps surrounded by armor. Yuan's gaze, which had been resting on the wine glass, turned to the owner of the footsteps. Did the disciplinary committee come? This was an interesting situation. Yuan, who had been half leaning on his chair, leaned forward. Dionysus's expression hardened, and the rankers who had been dancing and singing with him began to take a step back. Sister, are you doing this again? Athena. The throne of war and wisdom, and the shield of Olympus. She approached Dionysus with a murderous expression on her face. When will you stop playing around like this? Even after going through this. A long string of complaints followed. The rankers, who had been watching her, began to quietly leave their seats. No matter how quiet they were, they couldn't leave without Athena noticing. But she didn't seem to care about the others and continued to scold Dionysus. Your actions also affect the mentality of the lower rankers. Alcohol is for the body and mind. Dionysus is due, the best-selling steady seller in this tower. A voice interjected between the complaints. Athena turned her head to look at the direction of the voice. It was Yuan, who was sitting next to Heracles. Don't nag him so much. Your little brother is doing well enough. Even though he held drinking parties like this all the time, Dionysus was able to become a high ranker representing Olympus because of his business acumen. The businessman who earned the most points for Olympus. It was said that half of Dionysus's ranking was due to his wealth. I understand. Athena, who had turned her head to look at Dionysus for a moment, nodded obediently. It was an unexpected reaction. Instead, Athena spoke to Yuan. I heard you were here. Me, yes, Chuck. Athena, who had finished arming herself, took out the aegis she had been carrying on her back and said. I challenge you. Thud. Yuan followed behind Athena. Behind him, Heracles and Dionysus followed side by side. The two of them were interested in the big match that had been made out of the blue. Footsteps heading towards the training hall. Thud. I know that guy is good. As they neared their destination, Athena spoke. I just thought he could do better. Before Heracles and Hargan appeared, Dionysus was a ranker who climbed the tower at a speed that was unmatched in the history of Olympus. At that time, there were followers who said that he would one day become one of the three gods. But one day, Dionysus, who had become interested in alcohol, suddenly started making and selling alcohol. Money is necessary to run a guild. In that sense, Dionysus has been a great asset to the guild. That's right, it's my greed. Athena was a warrior who had risen to the throne of war. Her value lay solely in her strength and fighting. And so it was with Dionysus until he became a god ranker. Knowing that time, and knowing Dionysus's potential, Athena couldn't give up on Dionysus. The three of them followed Athena to the training hall, which was located far behind the royal palace. A large door that was at least 4 meters tall. Athena reached out a hand towards the heavy door. Kriak, the heavy door opened, and the interior of the training hall came into view. Clang, clang, bang, bang, bang. Spears and swords clashed, and shields collided. Numerous warriors fought inside, wielding their weapons and sweating. Their concentration was so intense that they didn't even notice the door opening. Athena walked between them and shouted, "Stop for a moment." The martial arts hall where the warriors directly under Athena trained. It was said that if Asgard had Valkyries, Olympus had Athena's soldiers, and they were that elite. And then they stopped what they were doing and turned their bodies towards Athena. Attention! Despite the fact that they must have been quite tired, there wasn't a single hair out of place. Their discipline was impressive. It was a sight that showed how well trained they were on a regular basis. Thud, thud, Athena and Eugene headed to the center of the martial arts hall. The soldiers who had been using the martial arts hall naturally parted ways. Eugene, who was able to use a considerably wide space thanks to that, nodded his head in satisfaction. This will do. Thank you for taking the time. It must have been a sudden and unreasonable request. It's not sudden at all. Eugene saw the competitive spirit in Athena's eyes. Thinking about it, it seemed to be the same when he first met her. Curiosity and competitive spirit that never subsided. And now, a desire to challenge Eugene, who had suddenly surpassed her. Perhaps she thought that she couldn't miss this opportunity now that Eugene was staying in Olympus for a while. Well, I needed to move my body a little anyway. Squeak. Eugene took a stance, drawing his sword in advance. It was the second day since he started resting in Olympus. It wasn't that long, but he thought it was enough of a break. If I rest any longer, my body will stiffen. In order to always keep his condition at its best, moderate rest was good, but it was also important to keep his senses sharp. It was time to start warming up his body that had gotten a little cold. And also, it's also a job to adapt whenever my stats change. The newly acquired stats, even though there were only a few, considering Eugene's mana stat, the numbers were enormous. Not only maintaining his senses, but also when he had to learn new ones. And that's why Athena, who was in front of him, was quite a suitable opponent. Aegis, the throne of war and wisdom. It was Eugene's first time fighting her. It is said that her defense alone is comparable to, or even better than, the three gods. Crack, mana began to pour out through the tip of the sword. Golden lightning. Athena's eyes seemed to widen a little at the power of the same nature as Zeus. I can attack as much as I want. Crackle, crackle. The lightning grew bigger and bigger. He hadn't used Oranos. Mana was overflowing. If it was this much, it seemed like he could definitely do it without the help of Oranos for now. Created. Lightning sword. Crackle, crackle. A straight sword shaped like a sword. At the mana pouring out of the sword, Athena took out Aegis without having time to think of anything else. Thud. Aegis was firmly embedded in the floor of the martial arts hall. As if that wasn't enough, she prepared her defense by infusing Aegis with mana. Aegis's shield is activated. Aegis's guardian is activated. Medusa's eye is activated. Screech. Above Aegis, several layers of shields made of mana were stacked. Also, above the shield, the face of Medusa with snake hair appeared. Medusa. A long time ago, a monster that led a city to ruin and turned hundreds of rankers into stone. Aegis had the power of Medusa sealed within it and remained as a skill. Stab. The best defense is offense. Athena began to charge at Eugene with Aegis in her hand, as the famous saying goes. Quang. And as Eugene's sword fell on top of Athena's shield. Quang. The moment the two forces collided with a sound like thunder. Creak. A crack appeared in the center of Aegis, which was known to have the strongest strength. Chapter 360. Quote. Athena hesitated at the gold that appeared on Aegis. A brief moment of hesitation. However, she soon began to put more strength into the hand that held Aegis, as if it were a good thing. Crash, crackle. She did not retreat against the electrified sword that struck Aegis. Crack, crackle. The gold on Aegis increased more and more. It seemed like the shield would break at any moment and electricity would leak into it. However, creak. She nonchalantly pulled out the sword hanging from her waist. A short sword, suitable for use with a shield. Looking at the gold of Aegis gradually splitting apart, Athena aimed the tip of the sword. The strongest weapon I have is not this item. Aegis is merely an item that represents her. Athena gritted her teeth and put strength into the hand holding the sword. Creak, thud, thud, thud. The fragments of Aegis, where the gold had split, fell down. Now, the moment Athena was about to stab her sword through the gap. I guess we had the same idea. Quote. A sword tip entered the gap in Aegis one step ahead. Shuik. Aegis shield is destroyed. Aegis guardian is destroyed. Eye of Medusa is destroyed. The skills manifested through Aegis were destroyed and lost their power. Athena's fingertips trembled at the tip of the sword that had stopped in front of her eyes. Your counterattack was too hasty. When you focus on attacking, your defense is bound to collapse. Swoosh. Yu-1 turned around, putting away his sword. Athena's thoughts deepened at those words. If I had just strengthened my defense a little more. Athena is the shield of Olympus. If she had only defended and not attacked, she was confident that she could have lasted at least an hour against Hades or Poseidon. No matter how strong Yuan was, it wasn't a fight that would end so easily. I guess we had the same idea. Athena had just now recalled what Yuan had said. Did he intend to pierce through Aegis from the beginning? Athena checked the area of the broken Aegis. The broken marks were clean, as if they had been cut cleanly. The only gold and fragments that had been split were a small part in the very center. From the beginning, Yuan had planned to break Aegis and stab his sword into it. From the very beginning, you knew what choice I would make. What are you spacing out for? Crash. Athena, who had been recalling the situation from just now, discovered Yuan, who was getting ready again beyond Aegis. It will take a while before I can loosen up my body. Familiar words to hear. Athena's eyes shone again. Boom. Yuan's fist stretched out. Athena, who had held Aegis tightly in her hand, staggered. The broken pieces of Aegis fell to the floor, and her legs finally gave out. Rip. Crash. Yuan, who had extended his fist towards Aegis, paused for a moment. His posture was unsteady. I think it's about time. At Yuan's words, Athena gritted her teeth and raised her sword. Everyone, prepare for an attack formation. Click, click. At Athena's words, the rankers spread out around the edge of the training ground got ready. It was Yuan's request. When the shield falls, send those guys in. At first, Athena refused. She didn't want anyone else to join her fight. However, after her fight with Yuan ended in a short amount of time again, she had no choice but to change her mind. Why not? Yuan, who had brought Athena to her knees again, looked around at the rankers who were showing their fighting spirit towards him. It might be a chance to teach them how to fight against a top high ranker. Athena couldn't help but agree that she couldn't be Yuan's match with her own abilities alone. Also, Yuan's skills were much better than she had expected. Attack. Crash. Lightning burst out of Yuan's hand again. Yuan wielded lightning freely without Uranus's help. Many rankers were swept away by the waves of lightning, and Athena's sword pierced through them. The fight continued into round 2. As the floor of the training ground began to shake dangerously, another guest entered. Creak. Wow, this is crazy. It's a mess. Crash. Harkin flinched back in surprise at the lightning that shot up to the entrance of the training ground. The inside of the training ground was a scene of chaos. Clang, whiz, clang, thud. Thud, clank, thud. The rankers who were fighting Wu Yun in the smoke-filled field collapsed one by one, greeting him. A ranker who flew in wearing armor rolled at Hargan's feet. Hargan shook his head as he stepped over the ranker who had collapsed with his eyes rolled back in his head. What's all this commotion all day long? Are you here? Oh, Hung Nim. Hargan, who belatedly found Heracles in the midst of the commotion, hurriedly bowed his waist and greeted him. Were you here? Your greeting is excessive. You don't have to bow your head like that. Same for me. I understand. Hargan was overly polite to Heracles compared to others. Since long ago, Heracles had been Hargan's idol. Heracles was Hargan's longtime goal. It was natural to be nervous when he met his idol right before his eyes. But what is it? I have something to tell that guy. That guy, it was Wu Yun, who was fighting the rankers including Athena. He seemed to have been fighting, recovering his stamina, and fighting again for several hours. I was wondering why I didn't get a call from him, but he was doing this. Is it urgent? I'm not sure, but I think so. What do you mean? A guest came from Asgard. Asgard. Heracles turned his head. Wu Yun was creating lightning in his hand. The rankers moved left and right to avoid the force, and Athena stepped forward with her aegis. Just as the lightning was about to fly away. Stop. Heracles, roar cut through the smoke-filled field. Crackle, crackle, the lightning created in his hand shook precariously. Athena's hand, which had been holding the shield firmly, lost strength, and the gazes in the hall gathered on Heracles. Wu Yun looked at Heracles as if to ask what was going on. It was then that he noticed Hargan. Heracles answered his gaze. A guest has arrived. A guest? Let's go for now. It seems important. Thud. Heracles turned around and headed out the wide-open door with Hargan coming in. Wu Yun, who was tilting his head wondering what was going on, began to follow Heracles and Hargan. Thank you, he said. Thank you for your hard work. Thanks for your hard work. Also, in Asgard, there was Odin. The rankers who were fighting Yuan in the martial arts hall greeted him and collapsed one by one. None of them had any stamina left. And that goes for Athena, the only one standing. Cheek. The cracks on Aegis spread. That was the moment when Athena put down the shield that seemed like it would never break. Puck. Thud. Thud. Aegis, made with various materials including adamant and mithril, the head of Medusa, and the touch of Hephaestus, shattered and fell to the floor. Despite the fact that her cherished item was broken, Athena did not have a face that was sorry or resentful. Rather, she had the most refreshing expression she had had in recent times. At least I didn't die to just anyone, Athena muttered, looking at the handle of the broken Aegis. Ares. Thor, Yuan asked in surprise at Hargon's explanation. He heard that a guest came from Asgard, and it was none other than Thor. He was the second in command of Asgard, having inherited the power of Odin the strongest. Why is that guy? He had seen his face a few times. It was when he moved to capture Poseidon during the destruction of Olympus and when Ragnarok took place. However, Yuan was not close to Thor. Well, I don't know that. Hargon shrugged and urged his steps towards the castle. Beyond the double-digit rankings, Thor was the prince of Asgard who would one day lead Asgard. The relationship with him was very important to Olympus as well. Of course, the rankers of Olympus, including Hargon, had no choice but to treat Thor with the utmost respect. Of course, it was a different story for Yuan. Crunch. Yuan followed Hargon at a slow pace, tidy his outfit that had come loose from his fight with Athena. The reason why Thor came to find him. It was to think about it in advance. Is there something else to ask for? Like Olympus, is it something big that even Odin can't solve? There was nothing that came to mind. Ragnarok is over. There probably won't be any enemies for Asgard, who finished the fight with Muspelheim. In addition, there was Odin in Asgard, the greatest Methusa in this tower. He excelled everyone else in both combat and magic. Why would Asgard, with Odin there, reach out to someone? It was hard to understand. More than anything, Odin's personality wasn't the type to easily reach out to someone and ask for a favor. More than anything, how does he know I'm here? It wasn't a big secret, but there weren't many people who would know that Yuan was in Olympus. Especially for Asgard, it must have been unexpected to know that Yuan was here at the current point in time. It was literally a strange visit. This way, the place they arrived at after following Halgan was a small annex on one side of the royal palace's garden. An annex located in the middle of a garden decorated with beautiful flowers. Halgan and Heracles stopped near it. He said he wanted to meet you alone. Then I guess this is where I leave you. Creak. Heracles grabbed the club hanging on his waist with his hand. Yuan, who briefly glanced at Heracles's behavior, began to walk. Screech. The unmanaged door made an old sound, as if it had been left alone for quite a long time. A small, Tenpyeong annex. It seemed like it was a place that the servants who managed the royal palace used a long time ago. A small bed and a narrow table were all there was in the room. Inside, Thor, who had his back turned, was waiting for Yuan. Are you trying to avoid people's eyes? You picked a strange place. Rustle. As he stepped into the room, the old floor sank a little. Thor didn't turn around right away. Thud. Yuan closed the door right away. At the same time, he felt a thin magic film spread around the annex. It seemed like it was meant to keep the sound from leaking out. Yuan didn't get any closer and opened his mouth while looking at his back. You're not Thor. Yuan knew Thor well. He was a clean freak to the point that you might think he had an obsessive-compulsive disorder, except when he was fighting with Mjolnir. Unlike his messy beard, Thud, Yuan began to walk towards Thor with a voice of conviction. And then, the guest who was waiting for Yuan turned around. Mimir.